Welcome, everybody, back into Nerd Sesh. As always, I'm Carson Brabber, and alongside me is Logan Camden, and today, a beautiful journey begins, Logan, because in the offseason, what is there better to do than look back at the beautiful history of the NBA? That is exactly what we are going to be doing in this series, in which we rank the top 50 players in NBA history. 3 years ago, we ranked our top 25 players, but I think we both agree there are some things that we would like to change from those lists, and also, why not just rank more guys? We love ranking shit more than anybody ever. We love NBA history as much as anybody ever. So let's get deeper into it. Let's have more conversations, more debates, show more love, get to watch more of these old dudes play. I just can't wait. I think this is going to be the greatest thing ever and probably the pinnacle of my life. You agree?
Yeah, I can't wait to get started. There's a lot that I want to go back and change from our list that we did 3 years ago, so I'm excited to have the opportunity to right some wrongs, so to speak.
Yeah, the lists are always going to change. Your perspective's going to change. The things you value are going to change. Maybe you get to watch more of a guy and you become a little higher or lower on him, whatever. That's inevitable. What I'm really excited about is this part of the list, honestly, where we get to dive into the guys who we didn't cover at all in that top 25, because there are still so many great players throughout NBA history who deserve to have some long conversations about them on a very nerdy podcast like this one. So we'll talk about some of those guys today. We are doing numbers 50 through 41. This will be a 5-part series. An episode will come out every week. And today we also have to give love to all the honorable mentions, of which there are many, and we have to, of course, establish our criteria before we get into anything, Logan. So what was your criteria when making this list?
I tried to keep it short, sweet, and succinct, and so I'll try to do that here. Pretty simply, number one is the winning impact that a player provides across the entirety of a career. And there is this push-pull mechanic that we are going to have throughout this episode with a lot of these debates. Higher peaks can outweigh the depth of an entire career, but someone's longevity could outweigh a briefer peak, and so there's going to be a little bit of a balancing act with that dynamic. I think there's a balancing act of offense/defense. I think in general, throughout my list, I want to make sure that I'm confident when I'm saying this. I am going to favor two-way players, guys who are impactful on both ends of the court, but it's not like a catch-all kind of, I'm always going to favor defense or I'm always going to favor offense. An offensively slanted guy who is that much better than a two-way player could outweigh the guy that is providing me more raw defensive value, but he's just surpassed by how much offensive value a guy is providing. So I am, in general, going to lean on the side of two-way guys, but all of these factors are important, and like I said, we are going to have a push-pull dynamic with a lot of these players. And then for active players, I am operating under the inclination that this is if they never played again.
Yes,
this is if they
100%.
retired today. I can't map out what I think a guy is going to do and project where he's going to end up on this list. So for all of the active players on this list, this is if they never played another game, another minute in the NBA. And then, pretty simple, if I have a tiebreaker between two guys, who would I rather have on my team? And that is going to be the ultimate tiebreaker against all these guys. Who am I more confident in providing winning value and giving me an opportunity to win a championship? So if I'm really struggling between two guys, pretty simply, who would I just rather have on my squad?
My criteria is pretty simply all about on-court impact. I don't care at all about accolades. That is true for any list that I ever make. Accolades literally just reflect other people's opinions. That's all they are. They are things that other people vote on. I don't think that's a basis on which you should form your own opinion, because other people are going to decide stuff that you disagree with all the time. So I don't care about that even the tiniest bit. That's at best an approximation of value, and we don't need to dive into that when we can just form our own evaluations of all these players. Also, I want to contextualize everything and detach a player's value from their circumstances rings as much as possible. And I specifically mean that in reference to people saying, oh, this guy has a ring, this guy doesn't, because there are players who fall into extremely fortunate situations. There are players who fall into extremely unfortunate situations, right? Like Jason Tatum, for example, doesn't really get a boost just for being the guy on a title team when he had one of the most talented starting fives in NBA history, and he didn't really play at a top 5 level in that run. He had a down scoring run. That's not to diminish Jason Tatum, who I actually really do like. It's more so to say it is possible to win a championship without a guy playing at a top 5 level, and it is certainly possible to play at a top 5 level for a long time, but never have the team around you that enables you to win a championship. So anti-ring culture on my list, anti-counting stats. It's not about that. It's not about a specific moment you may have. It's not about your cultural motion. It's about your ability to positively impact your team's chances of winning at basketball, and specifically winning championships. That is my guiding idea throughout this list. Like, the bottom line idea is who is most impactful, but ultimately it is that impact at the highest level. Who gives me the best chance to win the most championships? And that means I'm going to have to balance floor raising skill sets against ceiling raising skill sets. And I am going to prefer the latter if we wind up with two players who you could argue are equally great in different ways. To me, the most important thing is the player who gives me the best chance to win championships. So if that means this guy is more adaptable, he has an ability to adjust, to change his role in a way that is conducive to winning championships, whereas that other guy, it's like, yes, he can raise the floor for a team, he can get you to 40-something wins, but he has some fundamental core flaws that keep him from being as flexible when it comes to fitting into championship situations. I want the guy who is going to help me win championships, because that is the most important thing. And then also, the other thing to balance is absolutely peak versus longevity. We do a lot of stuff here where we just rank peaks because it's fun, it's clean, it's simple. You get to talk about people at their best, and you don't have to do the calculus of how much do I value the peak versus the totality of a career. This is where I come back to the idea of giving me the best chance to win the most championships, though, because maybe one guy gives me 12 years of like weaker all NBA level impact, and another guy gives me 3 years of being at a top 15 peak of all time. I think the former player is probably going to deliver more total impact, right? But the second guy might actually give me the higher chance of winning a championship, because for those 3 years when he is at that all-time great top 15 peak level, he's giving me about as good a chance as anybody. So if it comes down to a decision like that, yes, it's very valuable to help me be good for a long time, but if there's somebody who crosses that threshold of being so great for a brief period, I am going to value that. But again, it's a balancing act. Like, there's no absolutes in terms of this stuff. It ultimately comes down to a lot of tough judgment calls, because this part of the list is probably the toughest. There's just so many players who fall in a comparable range. And specifically on this episode, I think we're going to have a lot of conversations probably about the peak versus the longevity. At least I know that was a theme of 41 to 50 for me. The last thing I want to say on the criteria is, as always, I am judging all players relative to era. I think that is the only way to do it. You judge the greatness of an athlete based on how much they excelled against their peers. You cannot expect anybody to be decades ahead of their time, but we do appreciate and evaluate all eras here, except for the pre-shot clock era. So to clarify on that front, George Mikan is not going to be on this list. He dominated his era, but it's just too hard to judge when we have essentially no footage, and also he played in an NBA that was largely still segregated, was officially segregated until 1951, and even for a few years after that was effectively not fully segregated, but obviously, that's going to be an issue when it comes to treating an era as being equivalent to others if you aren't allowing black players to play in the NBA. So we start with 1955 on my list, and I think that covers the criteria. Now, Logan, let's get into the honorable mentions. I am limiting myself to 10 here. I easily could have done a top 75. That's probably what we'll do. We'll probably do a top 250 a couple years from now, but I just don't want to go on and on and on. This episode's going to be long enough as is, and I'm going to try to be concise. I'm not known for being concise, Logan, especially when we get to talking about the historical stuff, but I'm going to do my best. So with that being said, I think let's go through some of these honorable mentions, and maybe if the other guy has the player on their list, we just save the conversation for later. So who's your first honorable mention?
I think my toughest cut was between three guys. The first guy I'm going to shout out is the guy that I think peaked the highest, and that was Dwight Howard.
Yeah, Dwight is also an honorable mention for me.
Yeah, for me, the thing that kept Dwight from getting on my list was pretty simply his peak was just a little too brief in comparison to some of these other guys. I think Dwight peaked around being the best player in basketball. Those were the debates that Dwight Howard was in.
What? I mean, there was LeBron James walking the earth.
Yeah, but
Kobe
I mean,
Bryant.
if you were alive
He had a top
and
5
breathing in
peak.
that time, people were debating, is it Dwight? Is it Kobe? Is it LeBron?
People debate crazy stuff all the time. People were debating Kyle Kuzma versus Jason Tatum.
Okay.
Like,
all
I think
I'm
Dwight had
saying
a
is
top
that-
5 peak, but he never made an argument for best player in the world.
All I'm saying is that people were arguing that when Dwight was tearing the league up, and I don't think it would have been a ridiculous take at the time to take Dwight as your best player in the league. I would have disagreed, but all I'm saying is he was in those conversations, and I think it's important to contextualize that was a real debate. It's quick to forget when a peak doesn't last 5 to 10 years and we're spoiled with its longevity from a guy like LeBron. Dwight was in those conversations, and Dwight was among the best players in basketball. For me, the peak was a little too brief, and I thought Dwight just had some core limitations that limited him from being as effective as he could have been. The scoring, like, him not being a really high-level free throw shooter, like teams being able to exploit that aspect. But it's more to do with the peak being very brief, and that's a theme with the second toughest cut. And again, some of the rigidity stuff where guys are bringing – there's one guy specifically that was never a number one. There's a few guys like that in my top 50. Not true number ones, but could scale up and were still uber effective in a winning role in the playoffs. So while I think Dwight definitely peaked higher than some guys on my list, the peak was just a little too brief for him to get on here for me.
Yeah, I would say that Dwight had 5 top 5 level seasons. I mean, from 2008 to 2012, he was that dominant. He was an absolute athletic and defensive monster. He just fell off so damn hard and fast. And after Orlando, he just didn't really move the needle anywhere at all. The Lakers stint was a failure, and his impact had already dropped off significantly. And then the Rockets actually won a higher percentage of their games without him during his time in Houston. They won 64% without him, 61% with him. His career on-off differential outside of Orlando is just +1. So the Orlando stretch, great. It just isn't enough on its own to get him into the top 50 because, like you said, he was also just kind of a stubborn, deeply flawed offensive player. One of the worst passing stars in NBA history, like disgusting assist to turnover ratio, especially you get into the playoffs because he was kind of a turnover machine. Word to Moses, shout out. But yeah, Dwight is right there with him. And always wanted to be a post-up big when that ultimately wasn't going to be a really effective way to run team offense. Like, I think the Orlando offense they built around him from 2008 to 2010 gets really underrated. People look at 2009 and they say, oh my God, that's Dwight's run. And of course he was the best player. But what Jameer Nelson was doing and Rashard Lewis and Hito, like they had a lot of really gifted offensive players. And specifically the spacing they had was really, really elite for that time. Nevertheless, Dwight belongs in these conversations. He did not ever belong in LeBron conversations, but he is a worthy honorable mention. Okay, who is next for you?
The next guy, and I really debated all the way up to the buzzer having this guy on my list. I left Clyde Frazier off, unfortunately.
Okay, he's on my list. We will get back to that later. Who's next?
Another Nick. I have Patrick Ewing just off, and he was another very tough cut.
Whoa, we will save that for another episode? ? What do we do in this situation? There's a big chasm here on Patrick Ewing, I guess. Let's just save it. Let's have the debate next episode, but he's in my top 40. I'll tell you that.
The next guy, I mean, I guess you could have some of these lower guys. I didn't really put much credence to them. I would say the next guy in that same Ewing mold is Alonzo Mourning. I left him off my list as well.
Yeah, I didn't even have Zoe as one of my 10 first honorable mentions off. I think the struggle with him is just the lack of longevity in terms of that elite impact. I mean, he was a dominant defensive big, but top 50 is a pretty high bar.
I agree. The next two guys that we're getting into, like, I'm going to be honest, I know that some people aren't going to like this take out of me. I really didn't even consider a guy like Joel Embiid for my list, or guys who really got battered by injuries. There is one guy that's an exception, but that's because he accomplished the special goal that you're supposed to and delivered when he was healthy, and I just don't ever think you saw it enough from Embiid in the playoffs. So, like, even though his peak is exceptionally high, probably the highest out of any player that didn't make my list, I didn't really heavily consider him. The next two guys that were real cuts for me would have been Willis Reed, who I thought his peak was just a little too brief for him to make the list, and then Paul Pierce. And Paul Pierce was an interesting candidate because I think he can kind of get underrated as a scorer sometimes, but I did omit.
Because he shit himself.
Because he shit himself, and yeah, that's basically it. But
That's pretty much it.
I didn't think he peaked high enough to make my list, and there are other guys' games I just prefer a little bit more. But that's probably the real totality of guys I really considered to make my list.
Okay, I'm going to talk about Willis Reed and nobody else. He was also an honorable mention for me because the peak is very strong. Famously, he wins MVP and Finals MVP in 1970, but not strong enough to get him on the list for me when he really only has 7 good seasons and then his body just breaks. Only 650 career games played. Like, longevity did really matter to me on this list. If you're talking about very similar levels of impact over your best 7 years versus this guy's best 7 years, if another guy gives me 3-4 more really good years, then I'm going to go with that guy, obviously. And also, I do think Clyde Frazier was the best player during that Knicks run overall. He doesn't have a Finals MVP. He doesn't have an MVP like Willis Reed, but I do think, for reasons we'll get into later, he was ultimately the best player on the 70s Knicks. Okay, this is interesting. We are definitely going to differ some on this list. I can already tell that. I'll start with my second toughest cut because I want to get to my toughest cut in tandem with the guy who I actually landed on in my 50 spot because that was a real head-to-head debate that I had. Kevin McHale, Logan. Did he make your list?
McHale does not make my list. He would have been like right after Willis and them.
Yeah, he just has such a lethal scoring and defense combo, one of the most skilled and efficient post scorers in NBA history, like maybe the deepest menu of post moves along with Akeem at his disposal, extremely crafty and a good foul drawer and good free throw shooter, strong offensive rebounder, ambidextrous, like just all around an absolute handful to deal with in the paint, and defensively an elite rim protector with very unique defensive versatility for a big man of that time. Crazy length, famously some of the longest arms in NBA history, and legitimately good fluidity where in this era of a bunch of prolific scoring wings around the NBA, like McHale was the guy who was usually taking on that matchup for the Celtics, and he was holding his own at a high level, while also as a backline defender, he was fantastic. And then also a solid passer, definitely a very scoring-focused approach, but he was such a dominant scorer, especially in the playoffs, that I'm good with that because he had somebody like Larry Bird who could take on that primary playmaking load. And it really is the playoff performance that made McHale such a tough cut for me because at his best, 85 to 88 in the postseason, and that's 77 games. Those are 4 straight deep runs. He averaged 23 points and 9 rebounds a game on plus 9.5% relative true shooting with awesome defense. Like, that is a ridiculous peak. Logan, not to trigger you, not to hearken memories of I've got Larry Bird in my 10 spot, but McHale was legitimately the Celtics' best playoff scorer at this time. Like, he was unbelievably consistent and efficient, and he did it in spite of injuries and a broken foot.
I'm going to remember that. You didn't have to do that.
It is true. McHale was their best playoff scorer at his best in the mid-'80s. The reason, though, that I don't go with him is because although he has a solid resume as a number one, like without Bird, when McHale was in the lineup from 1981 to 93, the Celtics did win 54% of their games. They were 78 and 67. I do think there's no question he was best suited as a number 2 who excelled as that pure scorer and elite defender, but I think it very much helped him to have another high-level scorer and playmaker alongside him like Bird and somebody with that sort of offensive gravity. So I'm trying not to overvalue number twos on this list because I do think that's a tendency of mine. I just love the guys who are efficient and impactful on both sides of the ball, but also like you got to appreciate guys who can take on a big load to carry an offense. And so Mikal just not proven enough as a number one. And then the longevity makes it tricky. The fact that he probably only had like 8 real star level seasons, that was ultimately the final thing that kept him off this list for me. And the Celtics, I mean, throughout his career, they won 69% of their games with him, 67% of their games without him. So that comes back to the point of the infrastructure. I mean, those Celtics teams were just some of the most talented ever. I think there were guys who did a little bit more in terms of their impact as number ones, but Kevin McHale, one of the great number twos in NBA history, and I wanted to give him a shout out because I am very high on him at his best.
Yeah, and I mean, you love guys who can take big loads.
I do. Well, and that's ultimately why I keep Kevin McHale off the list. But he does have a freakish build, kind of like me, man. He's got the Carson Breber wingspan, and so I appreciate that. My next honorable mention, Russell Westbrook, Logan, did not make my list. Is he on yours?
I couldn't leave Russ off. I found Russ to be the most difficult player to rank, and specifically that dynamic you were talking about with to win a championship. I would never take Russell Westbrook. And like I know a lot of Russell Westbrook defenders would take issue with that. That was my hang-up. That being said, he is such an all-time floor raiser, and like I don't want to completely just devalue that. I don't think it's the most valuable skill to have, but I couldn't just write it away. Like when I was looking at some of the other guards that I was considering, you know, ahead of him or below him, and I'm like, Russ is just a better starting point than these guys, and so I was going to feel wrong leaving him off. He is on my list for this episode. He's not like way high up there for me, but it was just a gut kind of instinct, man. I'm not a Russell Westbrook fan, but I wasn't going to feel right leaving him off this list.
All right, well, we will save that conversation for when he comes up on your list. My next honorable mention, Artis Gilmore, Logan. Honestly, kind of a tough cut for me. The real challenge with him was how exactly do we value the ABA years, because I don't want to overvalue or undervalue those years. And the NBA years are good, but they're not the same as the ABA years. Like the ABA years are very big for his case, but he was, alongside Dr. J, one of the 2 most dominant forces in the ABA, and he did have pretty insane durability and longevity. Like, he gave you all-star level impact for pretty much 15 years, which is always rare, but was especially rare back in the 70s when he was playing. Super efficient scorer, 6-time league leader in true shooting percentage, dominant rebounder, and an elite defender in the ABA. And that's where I come back to, like, the 5 years he has in the ABA are so dominant. He's averaging 22, 17, and 3 with 3.5 blocks a game on plus 8% relative true shooting, joined a 44-win Kentucky Colonels team and improved them to 68 wins as a rookie, won MVP as a rookie, improved their defensive rating by 11 points compared to the year prior. Like, just ridiculously dominant two-way stuff. But that has to be contextualized by the fact that the ABA was not very strong in 71, not as strong as it would be immediately pre-merger, but then he still led the Colonels on a dominant title run in 1975. So the ABA resume is really strong. Then he goes to the NBA. He joins a 24-win Bulls team, immediately improves them by 20 wins, but ultimately, I just don't think he was impactful enough in his NBA career to get on here. And unfortunately, we don't really have robust data in terms of the difference in his team performance with him on versus with him off the court, which is something I'm going to refer back to a lot. And that's mostly because he was just never really injured throughout his best years. But in the NBA, his teams were mostly mediocre, and I think the biggest reason for that is probably that his defense regressed in a big way as he got a little bit older and as the competition got better. Like, his defenses were pretty consistently below average in the NBA through both his stints in Chicago and San Antonio. So I like the vision. I think the efficiency, the rebounding, the defense at his best, like, there's a very lean two-way impact there, but the defense falling off and him not being able to impose himself with volume like some of the better big men who I do have on my list is the reason that I end up just leaving Artis Gilmore off. But I wanted to give him a shout because he did have a very good career.
It's hard, too, with any of those ABA guys, man, because they all put up gaudy numbers and the competition wasn't as fierce, but they're all at such a high level. Dr. J, too. And you also see a little bit of an adjustment that's scaling up to the NBA, that it was a little difficult for those guys. But I wasn't surprising an Artis honorable mention. I'm kind of pleasantly surprised.
Yeah, man. Well, shout out everybody else in the ABA who couldn't get a mention. No Mel Daniels, no Dan Issel, no George McGinnis. Artis Gilmore is going to be the ABA representative along with, obviously, Dr. J. And there's a couple more guys we'll run into who also played in the ABA. But shout out to Artis. And shout out to Jason Tatum, Logan, who I already considered as an honorable mention. I think there's a case to be made there.
Yes,
well, is he on your list?
There is a case to be made for Jason
Perfect.
Tatum.
And you will make the case later. All right, I'm going to keep on running through. Gary Payton, Logan, is he on your list?
There's a case to be made, I'd say, for Gary
Fantastic.
Payton as well.
Fantastic. Allen Iverson, is he on your
AI
list?
does not make my list, no.
Okay. So this, I think, is an important conversation to have because this is probably one of the names who a lot of people will expect to be on the list, and some people would probably expect to be much higher even than just top 50. I think AI is such an interesting player to talk about. He's very polarizing, and I think part of that is his significance goes so far beyond just what he did on the basketball court. I mean, he was such an icon, but I also think there's a very big divide between the volume that he was able to consistently produce offensively versus some of the pitfalls of his play style and the inefficiency and whatnot. I do think that AI was a reasonably strong offensive floor raiser, and he was asked to carry some very limited Sixers offenses pretty much through sheer volume at a time in the NBA dead ball era when offenses were struggling, period, and they were doing him no favors with the groups they were putting alongside him. And if you look at his best years, like 2001 to 06 in Philly, he was improving their offensive rating by like 6 to 7 points when he was on the court compared to when he was off. But he was just getting them to be a dead average offense even when he was on the floor. So that's where we come back to the idea of the guy who absolutely has value in terms of being able to produce that sort of massive volume and that aggression. I mean, his ability just to apply constant downhill pressure and stress a defense, and at the Sixers' best, they were able to build around him, going all in on defense and rebounding and dirty work guys and letting AI take on that massive offensive load and just get them to be good enough offensively. And that got them to the finals in 01 out of a very flawed East. So again, there's absolutely value in it, but then it's also like, okay, can you build a great offense around Allen Iverson when he is such a low efficiency scorer and throughout his career is like 2% worse than league average true shooting, and he is a high turnover player, frequently around 4 turnovers a game, and he's not a natural playmaker, like very score first, and he was prone to taking some really wild shots and was a volume pull-up shooter, but was an inefficient pull-up shooter. And yes, he could get to the rim and the line at will, but as a small guard, he did have some issues finishing super efficiently. I mean, he was, for his size, an incredible finisher, but it's just the reality of being as small and slight as he was, but he was fearless. He was always going to make his imprint offensively. It's just with his core inefficiencies and offensive flaws, could you fit him into the context of an actual championship team? And I lean on the side of not at the same level as the guys who I went with in my top 50. I don't want to speak in absolutes because I think in Philly, like, that team playing the way they did is some combination of AI's inherent play style and also the limitations of the roster around him. I think an interesting data point is the 2008 season with Denver, when he actually did show an ability to like be more efficient, more focused on playmaking as a co-offensive number one alongside Melo. I actually think he was the best player on that team, but we just don't have much evidence overall, and it's a little bit trickier to project AI in my mind, like being able to hone everything in enough and be efficient enough to where it's like, yes, he is the guy or a top 2 guy on an elite offensive championship level team. because I do think there are guys who did great work as number ones on this list and who did either scale down more effectively or adjust, and they did lead to championship level success, or they just have more portable skill sets that I prefer. But I'm not anti-AI. I just think he's really interesting. Well, anti-Allen Iverson, I am not. Let me clarify on that. I do think the 0-1 run is a bit overrated for him, though. Not because it isn't impressive. It is. I just think people underappreciate that defense around him. And I think conveniently for that 1 year, everybody seems to like write off how weak the East was, because nobody talks about Kids 2 finals. Nobody talks about Reggie's finals appearance in 2000 like they do AI's. And I think the reason for that is people just have a different kind of love for AI, and people love the small guard and they love what he represented culturally and all that. And he's definitely a cool player, but ultimately did land outside my top 50.
Yeah, I mean, AI is a icon, but I agree with you in the skill breakdown. I honestly didn't think that, even as a Virginia legend, I didn't think too hard about including AI on this list. I think there are some, like you're saying, I think the roster build around him really needed to be very rigid and specific to maximize him. I think that team does get underrated. Like, AI is not the they've got multiple other award winners. You know, they've got the Defensive Player of the Year on that run, and Dikembe Mutombo. Didn't they have the Sixth Man of the Year, too, off the bench that year for that Sixers team? Like
Aaron McKee.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. That was a good team around
Aaron
him.
McKee too much.
I'm just saying that I do think AI, very cool, a cultural icon. I think he can get overrated in terms of how he's looked at historically because of what a cool and unique player he was.
Yeah, but I also think he can get underrated by people who just look at the efficiency and don't appreciate the levels of defensive attention that he drew and the load that was on his plate.
That era is the most important thing to contextualize. Like, I do think a guy like AI would obviously be more effective in the modern era with all this space to work with and how quick he was and all of that. And so, like, it is really impressive that he did that. I mean, I think that you can make that argument for Kobe, too, when you try to get all efficiency pilled with a guy like that. Like, just scoring the ball in that era was super difficult, the dead ball era, but no, I didn't think too hard about AI.
That's interesting. That's interesting that you have Russ on there, but you view AI like fundamentally differently, because I think they have a lot of the same pros of like just the weight they can carry for an offense as a floor raiser, but also like some of the core flaws.
I mean, Russ is just an all-time rim pressure. That would be the
so is AI.
I don't know, but I think Russ is better weaponizing that rim pressure into, opportunities for his
He's a substantially better passer, but like what AI did as an offensive floor raiser was legit. And for that reason, like I do view him fundamentally differently than some other volume scorers with efficiency issues like a Carmelo Anthony or like a Dominique Wilkins. Like I think, well, AI was a better playmaker than those guys, and I think he did more to actually warp defenses. Like he was applying constant pressure to you, and I value that. It's just not enough to get him on my list. All right, holy shit, let's go to the anti-Allen Iverson, Logan. Bob Cousy is another honorable mention for me. Look, I think there are some people who are going to say, hold on a second, how can you keep the freaking Houdini of the hardwood off this list? Because the accolades are very impressive. But, again, I don't care about accolades, and I do think that Cousy gets a little bit overrated. And I'm not just talking about Mad Dog Russo, Bill Simmons, the Boston media apparatus, whatever. Like, the Celtics just weren't that good before Bill Russell got there. Like, they were fine, but Cousy never got them to the finals before Russell and only won 2 playoff series in 6 years before Russell. And then after Cousy retired, the Celtics immediately had their 2 best most dominant seasons in 64 and 65, and they won 5 titles in the 6 years after Cousy. And I think because he has an MVP, people look at him differently, but I don't care about that because I don't think he deserved it. I think Bill Russell as a rookie was already the most impactful player on that team because he immediately took them from bad defense to best defense in the league, and that's why they won the championship. And I just think with all of the offensive flaws that Kuzi has, like bad efficiency, famously negative true shooting percentage, likely high turnover numbers. I think if you look back and watch, he was pretty reckless with the basketball, negative defender. And it's like, if your job is to be the offensive engine, but in every single one of Boston's championship seasons when he was on the team, they were never even an average offense, it's just not that compelling to me. Not to say that Kuzi wasn't very good, and like 12-time All-NBA in his time is impressive. That longevity alone is impressive when you're talking about the 50s and the 60s. But I do think when I attribute the credit to the Celtics for that dynasty, I mean, Bill Russell stands head and shoulders above everybody else. And then, I don't know, I probably think Sam Jones was actually a little bit better maybe than Bob Cousy. And so he's a worthy honorable mention too. Cousy did not make my list, though. I just think gets a little bit more credit than he probably deserves when it was really about Bill Russell and the totality of those teams.
Cracker tax.
I mean, valid, bro. Literally, like, the fucking honky of the hardwood is what he really was out there. But nevertheless, you know me, man. I value all these eras. So there you have it. Those are my 10 toughest honorable mentions. I will hold back from mentioning everybody else because we got to get into the actual top 50 here, Logan. And it's interesting. I already know that we disagree on a number of these. So who is in your 50 spot?
I kind of can't believe that this guy is this far down on my list, considering where he was the last time. No player has fallen further on my list than this guy. And it's more of me just kind of growing an appreciation of other players' games. And I have Jason Kidd here in my 50 spot.
Wow. Surprising to me. Kidd is in my top 40.
Yeah, I like Kidd a lot. I just, honestly, something doing some heavy lifting for Kidd in this is the fact that his game did age gracefully and he provided value even after his apex. The fact that, and it's not the be-all, end-all, this is going to be a very minor distinction for players when I'm struggling to decide between two guys, but I mean, Kidd was a very effective player even as he got older because he finally developed the J. He was a reliable three-point shooter, always one of the smartest players on the basketball court, and one of the most transcendent defensive guards of all time. I had him, I believe, 23 or 24 the last time we did these rankings. He is now in my 50 spot, and it's basically a philosophical thought. I just value guys who can actually provide me offense more, and I think that's more valuable. Even though I do think Kidd is one of the greatest defensive guards in NBA history. I mean, you look at some of the ways defense is transformed before and after Kidd arrived. You know, the Nets go from the number 23 defense to the number 1 defense in basketball the year he arrives. And the Suns, they go from the number 20 defense to the number 6 defense the second that Jay Kidd arrives. And so I still think Jason Kidd is every bit as much of a winning basketball player as I went to bat for him in that episode. I think Jason Kidd is a winner through and through. I think he has – and you can put him anywhere. You can put him alongside stars. He's going to enhance them and make them better. You can put him along average Joes, and he's going to do a floor-raising job with them. Like, Kidd is just a winner and gives me so much value in unique ways for a guard. The rebounding, the defense, the playmaking. I am going to hold the scoring limitations in his prime and at his absolute peak against him, and there are just other guards that completely surpass him as offensive engines. It's not particularly close. And then there are other guards that I do have higher than Kidd on my list that are providing me more holistic total value in terms of two-way ability, where they are plus defensively, but they're not as big glaring weaknesses in terms of scoring the basketball. And so I was going to have Kidd somewhere in this 41 to 50 range. I played with him as high as 45. I ultimately decided there are other guys that just don't have the glaring scoring weaknesses that Kidd does. I mean, I think Kidd is one of the weakest scorers in my top 50, pretty point blank. And so that's really the only big limiter that keeps him from being higher on this list. And like I said, he has fallen further than anybody from the last 3 years that we did this list.
Yeah, that's wild because I remember when we did the top 25, I was like, whoa, you're way too high on Jason Kidd. And now I feel like you're a little too low on Jason Kidd.
There's a lot of other guards that that have leapfrogged him. It just mostly comes down to the offensive game at their peaks.
Okay, well, here's what I'll say about Kidd. I think he's the best defensive guard in NBA history. I think his physical tools, his IQ, absolutely ridiculous. The matchup versatility that he had, and like you said, I mean, was the best defender on some truly dominant defenses when you're talking about those Nets teams that went to back-to-back finals. And that's just such a unique value for any guard to have, who is also a deeply flawed but ultimately strong offensive floor raiser. Like, no question, the scoring and the shot selection and the shooting with Kidd, like, they're all issues. I mean, a 43% career two-point percentage is disgusting, and he didn't get to the line much, and he couldn't consistently shoot the three until 05. Like, his scoring game was pretty ugly, but he was an elite playmaker, like one of the all-time greats we've ever seen when it comes to manufacturing, specifically rim assists for his teammates, which is always the most valuable thing you can do as a playmaker. But my God, I mean, the lob passing to Kmart and at times to Richard Jefferson, so valuable in that more clogged up offensive era. And over the years with the Nets, he had a plus 9.2 offensive on-off swing. So he only got them to be a slightly above average offense when he was on the court, but they were a disaster offensively with him off the court. So if you can carry your team to be an above average offense, and then you are also the best defender on the best defense in the NBA, that's a two-way package that I just think is more valuable than some of these guys who absolutely are better offensive players, but are not just not impactful defensively. I mean, we'll see who you wind up with, but negatives defensively. Like, I do think that Jason Kidd was a winning basketball player, and I think he was an extremely impactful player. And you look at some of the changes you were mentioning, like when he joins and leaves teams. The 01 Nets won 26 games, and then Jason Kidd joins the team and they win 52 games, and they go to the finals, and their offensive rating improves by 4 points and their defensive rating improves by 6 points. Like, he took a team that was in the gutter.
Man.
I mean, you're kind of making my point there, brother. But, like, he made them way better on both sides of the ball. Meanwhile, the Suns, who he had as a 51-win team in 01, they totally fall off in 02. Their defense falls off a cliff. They only win 36 games. Overall, in the Phoenix years, 97 to 01, they won 65% of their games with Kidd, 39% without him. And the Nets from 02 to 08 won 58% of their games with him and just 32% without him. I mean, you're talking about 25% swings in terms of your team's win rate. I just think all the impact stuff is there for Jason Kidd to be a top 40 player. I get it. It's weird, but it's also unique, and his value is different from a lot of other guys, but I think the two-way impact is there.
I love Jason Kidd. I mean, he's one of my favorite players to go back and watch. I'm becoming more offense-pilled, man. I'm just, the modern game is making me more.
But when you have a guy who carries your offense and then also can take on matchups against the best wings and forwards and guards in the NBA,
look,
changes the calculus.
I'm not going to act like there's not. I would take Jason Kidd over some of the players that I have in my top fit. Like, if I was in terms of winning, but these guys just don't have. Again, I'm working from a spot of I'm starting from zero, and I just feel like other guys just don't have these glaring scoring limitations that Kidd does have. But, I mean, he's a winner through and through. He has got some of the most unique value in NBA history, and I do think he's an all-time point guard. I just do prefer the skill sets of some of these other guards.
Plus 11 on-off swing over the years with New Jersey. My goodness, that's some impact right there. We will get back to Jason Kidd next episode. We'll try to keep it brief, but he is going to be in my top 40. In my 50 spot, I have another point guard, and I think this will surprise some people with how low it is, but I actually debated leaving him off my list entirely, and this is where I have Isiah Thomas. And I specifically really debated him versus Damian Lillard, Logan. So Dame was actually my toughest cut for this list, such a supremely valuable offensive player, but I wound up going with Zeke over him because I do think that Zeke was a great offensive player in his own right, and ultimately, it was his willingness and ability to do the little things, to be a solid defender and to be legitimately competitive with great hands and be super engaged and be a part of some great defenses. Obviously, I mean, the bad boy Pistons defensive greatness was about everything around him. Like, they had a number of all defense caliber guys, but a small guard being able to fit in and still contribute positively at all in that setting, like, you can't take that for granted, especially compared to a guy like Dame, who has never shown any interest in the defensive end of the floor his entire career. Like, even if you compare him to a contemporary like Steph Curry, right? Like, Steph actually cares about defense. Dame has just never given any effort, and so he's always been a clear negative there. And I do think that makes a meaningful difference when you talk about the ease of building a champion around one of these small guards. Like, if you can hold your own defensively, that matters to me. There's also a little sneaky offensive rebounding value with Isiah, which I also just think speaks to like the feist, the competitiveness, the effort that really defined his game in a lot of ways. He did the little things, and that matters to me. He also was a great offensive player, though. And I think the biggest reason that I am probably lower on him than people of the 80s and 90s and people who will say, oh, he's a top 5 point guard of all time, like a lot of people love Zeke, it does come down to the poor scoring efficiency. I mean, 2 points below league average true shooting percentage throughout his career. Also just thinking the Pistons' success was really more about their collective strength as a team and their depth and their defense and all of that than it was about one guy. People have the instinct to make it about the face of the team, but I mean, you go through those runs and there were a lot of different dudes who had big moments, and there were a couple other guys who were the Pistons' best player in certain stretches, but Zeke was obviously the best player overall, and he led a lot of good offenses. I mean, 6 straight top 10 offenses, 1 top 5 offense in his career, which was actually the number 1 offense in the NBA. And I can live with the subpar scoring efficiency because he is one of those guys who was constantly stressing and pressuring the defense, and because he was such an elite playmaker. Like, Isiah Thomas is an incredibly fun watch. He's the best ball handler of his era, bar none. It's not even close. And he's just a whirlwind downhill, and one of those small guards who lived in the paint, like AI in that way. And again, I think people just like love that archetype because it's cool to see the fearless small guard who knifes his way into traffic among the trees and finds a way to finish. But like, Isiah was really damn good at that, man. He was elite in terms of quickness. His body control in the lane was crazy. The ability to evade rim protectors both on the ground with his footwork, with his spins, but also in the air, the body control was fantastic. And he could convert some of these really difficult finishes against much bigger defenders, right? And had like a pretty impressive array of finishes and runners and whatnot. But also it's the passing that stands out more so. Like, he was an extremely inventive interior passer, and he was going to pressure that basket over and over again, and he was going to create lay down, dump off opportunities for his teammates around the rim. And I just think that's a really valuable thing. Like, throughout NBA history, if you can pressure the rim, that's always going to make your team offense better, especially if you have the ability to create for others at a high level off of that ability. And he was really good at that. So yeah, he would take some wild shots. I mean, some tough pull-ups and some wild runners. And sometimes it's like, all right, Isiah, you're a very skilled finisher, but that one's not going to go. And that's where a lot of the inefficiency comes from. I mean, although he was a great passer, he was an aggressive scorer too. But I like the aggression offensively. I think aggression is what bends and stresses defenses and opens things up for everybody. And that was his approach to the game. So he played like a true offensive engine in that way. I also think his playoff resume is a legitimate strength. Like, he's a bit of a riser in terms of the playoff scoring. From 1984 to 1990, he gave you 22, 5, and 9 on minus 1.5% relative true shooting. So the efficiency is still subpar, but the volume is legit. And that's where he has some of these like iconic moments where people talk about the 88 finals, him scoring 25 in a quarter off of the badly twisted ankle, or the 1990 finals. He was just filthy. I mean, 27 a game in that series on plus 8.5% relative true shooting. He actually put on a jump shooting clinic, and he was a good jump shooter. He had a solid mid-range game, although the 3 was really not a factor in his game at all. But I think there's this duality with him where I do think he often gets too much credit for the bad boy Pistons success because we always look at the best player first. I think it's important to acknowledge that He wasn't all NBA either of their title seasons. I don't care about accolades, but I'm just using that as a way to like reflect what the public opinion was during those regular seasons. It's not like he was considered to be among the very best regular season players on the planet. And like Joe Dumars was all NBA, and Dennis Rodman was Defensive Player of the Year, and Bill Laimbeer had been a 4-time All-Star, and Mark Aguirre and Vinnie Johnson were just like quality professional scorers, and they had some quality bigs in the rotation like John Salley and James Edwards and Rick Mahorn. Like, those teams were extremely deep and balanced, and they were ultimately carried by one of the best defenses we've ever seen. Like, that was their greatest strength as a team. So Zeke had big moments, and he was the guy. Like, he was the best player for the Pistons, no question. But in the 89 finals, it's Dumars who was the guy in finals MVP. And in the 88 and 89 finals, it's Rodman's defense on Magic that you look at and it's like, wow, that's so outstanding. That's one of the stories of the series. And Laimbeer had that unique value as a stretch big. And Aguirre and Vinny, they had their huge stretches off the bench. And the defensive front court was great. Like, it's one of those teams where it really is about the collective strength of the unit. You're getting star level contributions from several guys, and you have elite depth. And so I think to make it all about the best player on the team is inaccurate, and that's where I probably come down as being lower on Zeke than most people. But I do think he deserves to be on this list. Like, the longevity is another tricky thing with him because it's kind of a mixed bag. He gives you like 9 really good seasons, but then he falls off pretty quickly. Like, after 1990, he just wasn't the same. And that whole Pistons group fell off really fast. They had this sort of meteoric rise from 88 to 90, and then pretty quickly it came crashing down. But I do think when it came down to him versus Dame, the defense and the little things were the tiebreaker, and why I wound up with Zeke on my list.
Yeah, I have Isiah in my top 40. I have him higher on this list. I don't necessarily disagree with any of the points that you're making. I think that was a great Pistons squad. My thing is, and I give credit to guys like this on my list, Zeke is one of those guys that came into the league and was great immediately and then was phenomenal for the next 11 seasons. Like,
maybe we disagree slightly on how long he was really good for.
I think
that.
he gives you,
because I think he falls off a cliff in 91.
I think he gives you 11 great seasons from his starting point, and like, I just really value guys that, like, I mean, came into the league. I know what I'm getting for 10 years. I agree with you. That's a great basketball team that wins the title, those Piston squads, but Isiah is the engine of those offenses. He's one of the greatest playmakers and passers of all time. And an additional point about him scaling up in the playoffs, I thought he protected the ball better when it come playoff time too, in also becoming a better scorer. But yeah, I just love Zeke as a starting point, and I think his resume and his legacy and his career are kind of just infallible in some ways. Like, he's just, there's not really anything, and like, he could have done it for longer. He could have peaked higher, yes, but like, he didn't leave any meat on the bone. Like, he kind of accomplished everything that he needed to. Like, there are guys that I think peaked higher. There are guys who did it for longer, and I think those are limiters of what keeps him from climbing higher. But one of the best offensive engines of the 80s, he is providing value in other ways that other guards aren't, and he ultimately, in my opinion, was the best player. I don't disagree with a ton of the points that you made on Zeke. I do have him in my top 40, though.
It's interesting. I guess the only area in which I would push back on, like, the flawless resume is there are flaws to his game that if he doesn't have this extremely deep, elite defensive team, could have held his team back from
but he was
reaching
such
the heights
a
that they
good
ultimately
playmaker
did.
that kind of like that.
But Logan, he's one of the least efficient scorers of anybody that we're going to talk about, right? And he was a high turnover player, and he was a small guard. Like, he's on my list, but I do think this is a reality throughout NBA history. If you have the team around you that can cover up for your flaws, then we will forget about your flaws more willingly. Like, he was
He's
a flawed
special,
basketball player.
ahead of his time offensive player, man.
Great ball handler, absolutely. but flawed even in his time. And again, really only led to like one elite offense, led to a lot of good offenses, but I don't know. Even though I have him above Dame, I would make the counter argument to the angle you're taking of like, all right, what if theoretically you gave Dame that sort of infrastructure, the equivalent of that in
Maybe
the
I'll make that
2020s where you
myself.
have 9-10 quality players and a great defense behind him. Okay, I guess that's the thing where I do think Isiah, awesome, but you have to understand the totality of those teams and how good they really were when we tell the story of that. And I think, unfortunately, almost nobody other than Isiah gets enough credit for how good those teams were. I mean, Rodman was at one of the highest defensive peaks we've ever seen, and Dumars was one of the better two-way guards we've ever seen. And Lambeer, I mean, evil guy, but ahead of his time. All right, maybe not evil, but deeply unlikable, whatever. Anyways, let's move on from Zeke. Who do you have at 49, Logan?
Yeah, so this is where I have Russell Westbrook, and I found him to be the hardest player to rank of any player that we're talking about today. He's one of the best floor raisers that we're going to talk about. I mean, in NBA history, I think one of the all-time greats in NBA history. That 2017 group that he drugged to 47 wins and ultimately took home the MVP, it's alongside Victor Oladipo, Andre Roberson, Domantas Sabonis, and Steven Adams as his starters. Like, I can't think of a worse spacing lineup you could have trotted out for one of the great all-time rim pressures in NBA history. And so I always kind of come back and just wonder, like, if the Thunder had leaned in and gone all in on this, like, offensive-centric floor spacing unit where, you know, you don't go complete zeros defensively across the board alongside Westbrook, but you slant it more to where he has actual legitimate floor spacers. And I wonder, how great could that offense have been? Ultimately, though, my sentiment on Westbrook is he is a ceiling limiter, and for a lot of reasons. The high turnovers, the rigidity of his play style, the fact that he had to be so ball dominant, the disastrous shot selection that always popped up with him as the star guy, and unfortunately for him, a game that did not age gracefully. You know, I talk about a guy like Jason Kidd that in his old age adjusted and still provided value in his old age because he developed a jump shot and was still that smart and that great of a playmaker and decision maker and still brought it defensively, whereas a guy like Russ, when he lost that athletic imposition and advantage, you know, he fell off a cliff really quickly. And so I do understand, even with Russell Westbrook's elite peak, leaving him off this list entirely because of how flawed he was as a building block. But I come down to it and I think about him as a starting point. I don't know if you could win a title with Russell Westbrook as your star player. I'm kind of skeptical of it, but I do think that I have to give him props and credit for what a floor raiser he was, the all-time rim pressurer that he was, and the fact that he did it with such a limited supporting cast around him when he was the guy and still led out to success. Again, it was mediocrity. It was always going to end in him getting bounced early in the playoffs, but an all-time athletic force, an all-time rim pressure, and like I think about him as a starting point versus some of the guys that I left off, them being flawed as well. I think Russ peaked higher than them and is just a better floor raiser than them, and so I have a complicated relationship with Russ. I do think he is uniquely limited in some ways that other guys aren't, but it came down to a gut decision, and so it's such a hard dynamic with this list. I do have guys that are number twos above Russell Westbrook. Like, I just do. I don't think they could have done the number one carry job that Russ did. But ultimately, it's like I don't think Russ could have been a number one. And so I'm not going to hold that against the other guys that they didn't peak higher as number ones when they were more malleable and provided winning value in different roles, whereas I just don't think Russ was capable of that. So I'm having to do this tightrope balancing act with Russ where I think he's a better number one than some of the guys higher on this list. Then they could be in that role, but ultimately he couldn't scale back and be a super effective number two or number three, and he never provided that. So I had to have him on my list. I couldn't really have him much higher than this range, this 49 to 45 range. So ultimately, I have Russ in my 49 spot, and that feels just about right.
Ironically, I think you might be slightly underrating Russ the number two and overrating Russ the number one, actually. And the reason I say that is, like, Russ was the second best player on some legitimately elite offenses and legitimately elite teams. And yes, he had his flaws that were ultimately limiting for those teams, but I think those same flaws were limiting when it comes to his ability as a number one. And it's like, yes, I mean, through the rim pressure and the playmaking and the sheer volume, like he was absolutely well suited to raise the floor for offenses and some limited offenses with just a huge load on his plate. But also, I guess I just question the significance of that when you know that there's such a hard ceiling with him as your offensive number one. And it's like, okay, he can get you to be a slightly above average regular season offense, and then you get into the playoffs and he is going to take the worst shots you've seen in your entire life and turn the ball over at an egregious level. Like, that's
I don't think those numbers are the be-all, end-all with him as the number one, though. I think the context of his team being so limited offensively around him is really important to contextualize.
But in 2018 and 2019, those teams were actually pretty good. And Russ was still just brutal in the playoffs, man. Like, he is one of the least efficient playoff players in NBA history. -5% relative true shooting in his playoff career with the massive turnover numbers. And it's like, so much of it is just truly awful decision-making. It's like the worst volume three-point shooter in NBA history, jacking up 10 threes in a game and jacking up a bunch of jumpers that he's just always been bad at making. So I think he's ultimately too flawed for me to like him on this list. Like, I do think he's an extremely talented player, but when it comes to the super high turnovers, the super low scoring efficiency, the ball dominance, the slight negative defense where he gets overrated sometimes just because he was athletic. But especially if you're talking about 2017 to 2019, Russ was a bad defender at that point. He was a little better in the early 2010s. Like, absolutely, 2017 to 2019, he has a +10 offensive on-off swing. Like, he was carrying those offenses, but carrying them to what? Like, it just ultimately wasn't that significant. And as an offensive number two, I do think you saw the value of his playmaking, like fully unlocking a guy like Kevin Durant and his off-ball scoring and all of that. But then again, the same inefficiencies and flaws held him back in that role as well. And I do think over the course of his career, like, just not as impactful as the counting stats would indicate. Plus 2.7 career on off swing, like, that's lower than I think anybody who I'm going to have on my list. And I do think it aligns with the fact that it's like, yes, he could eat up volume, but what was the ceiling of a team built around him? And I would agree that we didn't get to see it. Like, we never saw that perfect team build around Russ, right? Where you just max out shooting. But that team build is also easier to just visualize than it is to achieve. And I think building around Russ at that high level is actually pretty tough to pull off. And then, like you said, I mean, the longevity, it's not bad. We're just spoiled for longevity in this era. But after 2020, it's pretty rough. I mean, I know some people like the Washington season. He got a lot of triple doubles. I don't think he was actually that impactful that year. And then everything since then has been him either being like a problem or him just being a role player. So I see the angle for Russ with my criteria, which is impact and ultimately my confidence in you being able to contribute to championship level basketball. Russ is just too flawed to make my list. In my 49 spot, though, I have a contemporary of Russ's. I have another active player, and I imagine some people will not be pleased that I have this guy above Russ, but when I thought about my criteria, I do think he better aligns with it. I have Jimmy Butler here, and I think Jimmy's just underrated. I think there are people who will look at the accolades and they'll say, well, how can you have him here? I just think the accolades underrate him. And I think that's reflected by the fact that how many different years in a row did we come back after the playoffs and say, oh yeah, Jimmy's a top 10 player, or Jimmy's right around the 10th best player, and he should have gotten more respect throughout this season. Like, that kind of felt like the inevitable conclusion because his value just shone through in the playoffs, and he elevated his game in some ways, but he's also just built to be a winner. And I think his impact across different situations is a pretty unique thing in NBA history. He's got a +7 career on off differential. That's an elite mark. I mean, it's second tier, right? It's not up there with the LeBron, Steph, Jokic, KDs, but it's still upper echelon for sure. And it makes sense because he's one of the great Swiss Army knives in NBA history. He is an elite defensive wing, one of the more savvy off-ball defenders of this era, but somebody who also had like legit on-ball matchup versatility at his best. He's an elite foul drawer, one of the craftiest we've ever seen there. He's a strong mid-range shooter, really good mismatch attacker, rare combination of size, strength, ball handling, shot making, that self-assured pace that he always played with, like the ability to just chisel his way to his spots in the playoffs was always so valuable. And then he's a great driver, really good finisher at the rim, patient and physical, there again, seeking contact, finishing through it. He's an elite offensive rebounder for his position. He's a strong cutter. He's a really strong passer. Like, he just connects things for you on both sides of the ball in so many different ways. When we talk about the little things that don't show up in the box score but impact winning, Jimmy Butler is one of the best stars that we've seen at all that stuff. And I think it all stems from the fact that he's got this great athletic frame. I mean, 6'6", 220, and a really good athlete, but he's also just one of the smartest, most instinctual players in NBA history. And I think that's kind of his greatest strength on both sides of the ball. And he has shown a really special ability to elevate pretty much any situation because he will do all the little things. And then he can also just take over games like we saw in 2022 and 2023 when across those two runs, he averaged 27, 7, and 5 on back-to-back runs to the conference finals and the finals with awesome defense. Like, I think it's too easy to kind of just dismiss Jimmy and say, oh, he's not at the same level as a number one as some of these other guys. But it's like we saw him be the number one on several awesome teams, on two teams that went to the NBA Finals. And you can say whatever you want, oh, weak East, but like, man, they had to knock off the 1 seed in 2023. They had to knock off the Boston Celtics, and Jimmy was just fantastic in that run. And again, I come back to the track record of everywhere he's gone. They're way better with him on the court. The Bulls from 2015 to 17, once he became an actual star, won 56% of their games with him, 42% without him. Then he goes and joins a 31-win Wolves team. They go 37-22 with him that year. They go 10 of 13 without him. They're 14 points better with him on the court in terms of net rating. Like, he makes a huge impact there. Then he goes to Philly, makes them substantially better. That's universally seen as their best team ever. Then he goes to Miami, and over 6 years, they win 60% of their games with him, just 47% without him. And he's the best player on two finals teams. Then he joins a Warriors team, and we're talking about 35-year-old Jimmy now, right? They were 25-27 without him. They go 23-7 with him. He immediately transforms them on both sides of the ball. Even this year, the Warriors were 23-15 with him, 14-30 without him. Like, I just think his resume is underrated, but the consistency of the two-way winning impact, and specifically in the playoffs, being able to scale up his volume, maintain good efficiency, like, it's just a great resume that I'm very high on. And also the longevity is legit at this point. I mean, we're talking about a full decade of strong star-level winning impact. He's done it as a number one. He's excelled as a ceiling-raising number two, even in his older years. And so I know maybe it seems crazy to have him above Dame, to have him above Russ, to have him above these guys who I think have gotten more hype at various points in time, but I do believe the consistency of Jimmy's impact when you talk about winning basketball games is strong enough to put him on this list.
I completely agree with you. I mean, I've got Jimmy up at my 41 spot, so he would be the final guy that we get to in this episode. But, yeah, when I just thought about Jimmy in his skill set and what he provides, he is just a winner. And there's not really any flaws in his game outside of a uber-reliable catch and shoot or pull up 3-point jumper. Like, I just think about Jimmy back in the playoffs and how I felt about him from 2020 to 2023, and it's like it is a very, very short list of guys that I want over him. I mean, my phrase back then was, gimme Jimmy. When in doubt, I want Jimmy Butler on my squad. And because I had him in this 45 to 41 range, and I ultimately at the last minute bumped him up to 41, and I just asked myself, who is bringing me the most value? And I feel like it's Jimmy. And ultimately, it was his defense that put him over the top, where there are a lot of similar guys that can score from every single level. And Jimmy's elite mid-range game was the bedrock of it, right? Like, great athlete, could get downhill, could do damage from every level, but the mid-range game was what it was built upon, and he's got such a strong foundation there. Really good playmaker, makes his teammates better, right? And there are some other guys that also applies to, but then I thought about it, and Jimmy is giving me such elite defensive value on top of that, where he can take on these primary matchups. And,
yeah,
week East be damned. Jimmy delivered, Jimmy got there in the playoffs, could always ignite and always got better in those situations. And again, just gives me such complete value. So, yeah, I think it may shock people with how we view players of this era, that Jimmy is this high. I don't think he sticks out. I think he belongs. He always got better when it was playoff time. Yeah. He gives me value across the board, offensively, defensively, on the glass. He can do it, like you mentioned, in a multitude of ways. As the number one, as the number two, Jimmy's the man. And I just think the regular season, the accolades, the legacy, the basketball reference page isn't going to do Jimmy full justice, but I will, man. I love Jimmy Butler. I don't think he sticks out as like a sore thumb in these conversations. I think he belongs, and Jimmy's in my number 41 spot. I love Jimmy Butler, man.
You do. You always have. I do think he's a substantially better playoff performer than Russ or Dame. And 100%. I do think it's easier to build a great team with Jimmy at the core of it. Like you said, I mean, the only flaw with him is the lack of a reliable three-point shot, which isn't nothing. But when he just does so many positive things to impact the game, it's like, how many years of him doing that and it working in every situation
think about
do you need?
I just want to emphasize, too, the limited rosters that Jimmy was elevating to get to these spots.
100%.
Like, credit to all of those honkies who were drilling threes in those series. The supporting cast is kind of laughable when you think about it in retrospect, that he's taking Bam as a number 2, Tyler Hero as his number 3, rookie Tyler Hero in that first run, And then it's Duncan Robinson and Max Strus and
Gabe Vincent,
Martin stepping up. Like, it's kind of crazy, the supporting cast that Jimmy was getting to elevate to these spots.
Yeah, although I will say playoff Bam deserves his respect, because it was really Jimmy, Bam, Spo. And, I do want to give credit to Spo as being the best coach in the NBA for a few years, and Bam as being one of the most consistently elite defensive players. But like you're saying, I mean, around that, things were very interchangeable. And 2020 was the more talented team. They had Dragic, then Dragic gets hurt. 2023 in that run, Hero is hurt. And like you're saying, it's literally Jimmy and Bam and just shooters, and you're like, how the fuck did they get these guys to the finals? Definitely Jimmy deserves a lot of credit. He is a winner. And the objective of the game, Logan, is to win. So, who's in your 48 spot?
I kind of anticipate this guy not being on your list, but I just love this guy's game, man. And I've got a soft spot for him, and he delivered in the biggest moments.
Omer Asik.
Yeah, I've got Timofey Mozgov for his 93-point performance, man. How could I leave him
on
off
my list?
I've got big game James Worthy here in this spot.
Ooh, I like it.
I take it he's not on your list.
He's not on my list. He was one of the honorable mentions who I restrained myself from mentioning.
Worthy
Big game James over McHale is interesting to me. If we were going with number 2s, or in Worthy's case for a time, number 3s of the 80s, but make the case.
Yeah, and that's a tough dynamic just because those weren't the star guys on their teams, right? For Worthy, he's playing third fiddle behind Magic and Kareem. For a guy like McHale, he's playing second fiddle behind Larry. But like you mentioned, on any given game, it could be McHale serving you buckets and being the best offensive player. Worthy is one of the most complicated guys to rank on this list because of that dynamic, and I acknowledge that. That being said, I also don't want to handicap or hinder a guy for excelling as the third guy and consistently delivering. And not only that, but filling in the gaps for his superstars. And that is where I think James really excelled. One, not only always scaling up his game in the playoffs, where for his career, is a 20 to 25 point per game scorer in the playoffs, a couple of those runs getting above 24 points per game, but also providing value in other ways as a rebounder, as a plus playmaker, as an effort and energy guy, taking on, wing defensive matchups and being the hustle energy guy, hustling for loose balls and doing all the little stuff alongside guys like Magic and Kareem. Really what gets him on this list is just the reliability of his scoring in the playoffs. And I could make that same argument for McHale, which is why I have no issue if you wanted to put McHale in this spot. Like, those guys were such elite. I don't want to call them role players because they're not, but definitely secondary superstars, and it's what makes them hard to rank. But Worthy's scoring, to me, was just so consistently reliable in the playoffs. That's what gets him on this list for me. Do I think he could be a number one? By no means. I think there's a lot of other guys that I omitted from my list that I would put above Worthy if I was doing that thought exercise. But in that number 2 to 3 role, I think you're going to be strapped to find a ton of better guys in this role. And he just consistently delivered. The knocks on him, again, the fact that he wasn't a number one, I think you can hold against him. The brevity of the peak and the brevity of his career, I think you can hold against him. Like, Worthy's in and out, man. He gives you 12 seasons, and he's gone. After that age 32 season, he's out, and it was a pretty quick fall-off after he was an All-Star in 1992. Toward 93, he sub 15 points per game. 94, he sub 11 points per game. 95, he's out of the league. So I think those are all valid criticisms and knocks on James Worthy for not being on this list. But his scoring was so reliable. He did it every single year, and it ended in titles. The guy's a 3-time NBA champ and just, I think, one of the most consistent playoff scorers of all time, man. They call him Big Game James for a reason, and he consistently delivered on the game's biggest stages. Worthy was one of these last-minute inclusions for me where I considered leaving Worthy off for guys like Dwight, guys like Patrick Ewing, Walt Frazier. Ultimately, though, really reliable scoring and just a fucking bucket. That's why James Worthy's on my list.
Yeah, man. I mean, if you're looking at like the 87 to 90 playoffs, it's just a phenomenal scoring run where it is McHale-esque in terms of like the ability to ramp up the volume and be super efficient. And he's doing it with like supreme scoring versatility for this time where he is phenomenal with his back to the basket. He's a weapon in transition where he's so agile. He's so good from the mid-range. Like, he was a great isolation scorer, but also an awesome play finisher playing off of Magic. And like you said, like, solid passer, solid defender. I guess I do get hung up on him versus McHale because I just think McHale was better. I think McHale was an even better playoff scorer, and the defense is a difference. McHale being one of the best defenders on the planet and having a run like he did in 86 where it's like long stretches of like, whoa, like this guy is outplaying Larry Bird, and Larry Bird is the 3-time reigning MVP. But also Worthy has his moments, and 88 is deservedly finals MVP. So I like him. If I were going to go with one of these number 2s from the 80s, though, I would have gone with McHale. And ultimately, I did feel like there were guys who did more heavy lifting in terms of that impact as the guy. And if you look at what happens after Magic retires, the Lakers do fall off pretty precipitously. They were still decent. Like, they were okay with Worthy as a number 1, but I do think he needed an elite lead playmaker alongside him to be the best version of himself. I love a Big Game James shout, though. He's a GOAT. In my 48 spot, Logan, I have a guy who is not on your list. This is where I have Joel Embiid. And there's a theme in this section of the list that is going to unfold, but he's just too good at his peak for me to leave him off. Like, he's one of the most gifted, dominant scorers ever and has one of the more impactful two-way peaks we've ever seen. Like, I keep on mentioning on-off differential because it gives you a picture of how a team performs with the guy on versus off it, which ultimately is what we're trying to measure, right? How much do you impact the game? And for his career, Embiid as a plus 10 on off swing, I mean, that is putting him in the most select club with LeBron, Steph, KG, Jokic, right? Even a little bit above Chris Paul, Dirk, like the greats of this century. And the production is also insane. 28, 11, and 4 on plus 4.5% relative true shooting. We know the skill set is unicornish. He's 7 foot 280 with this unique ball handling and driving ability for this size. Just a monster foul drawer. So hard to guard without fouling, and so savvy about drawing those fouls. And a supremely skilled shot maker at his best, where, I mean, the rhythm dribble pull up, the face up game from Embiid, when he's on, it is just completely unstoppable. And when he was at his athletic peak and he could parlay that jump shooting threat into the driving at a really high level, like, we're talking about a guy who put together a couple of the greatest regular season scoring campaigns in NBA history. And then on the other side of the ball was an elite rim protector and an elite defensive rebounder. So I just think the impact resume is absolutely there to have him on this list. Since his debut in 2017, the Sixers are 319 and 171 with him. They win 65% of their games, and they're 125 and 186 without him, 40% of their games. And I will say, Embiid is a guy who unfortunately gives us a huge sample in terms of, all right, how has his team performed with or without him? And the difference could not be more obvious. Like, they are dramatically better on both sides of the ball with him on the court. I think the knocks on Embiid are very obvious. It's the overall availability, the brevity of the peak, and the playoff performance, where he is a legitimate dropper, and we saw the same things lead to him drop throughout his peak. The jumper failing him repeatedly in the postseason, his body breaking down through injuries and fatigue, the turnover issues and bad decision-making against double teams, where his limitations as a passer were a real problem, and he was a negative assist-to-turnover ratio guy very consistently in the playoffs. His defensive rigidity, even just like the lack of mobility compared to some other elite bigs, I think could be exploited with Embiid in the playoffs. And still, Logan, I mean, the playoff numbers, they're not the same as they are in the regular season, right? 25, 10, and 3 on just plus 1% relative true shooting. The efficiency takes a big hit. But it's like, that's his production floor with still impactful defense. And the Sixers are 16 points better in terms of net rating with him on the court, even in the playoffs. Like, yes, he is a real dropper, but the impact floor with this guy, you really can't sell short. Part of it is just being as massive as he is and pairing that with his offensive skill. Like, Embiid was always going to stress the hell out of the other team. And the value of that, the value of him just stepping on the court, even if he's only 75% physically, it's tremendous. So I get it. He's a real playoff dropper. He also only has 6 career seasons playing 50-plus games. And so when it comes to my idea of who gives me the best chance to win the most championships, it's pretty tough to win a championship if the guy can't stay healthy over the course of a season, and specifically a playoff run. But the peak is just too good to keep him off this list. I mean, the handful of seasons we do have where this guy was a perennial MVP candidate, and deservedly so, I just don't think we've seen that many players who were better in terms of their two-way impact than Embiid at his best.
I'm surprised. I'm really surprised.
Really?
Yeah.
Really? Why?
I mean, I don't like negatively talking about Joel Embiid anymore, just because, like, this is probably the worst. Bill Simmons says that shit where it's like, if we replay this guy's, career 100 times or whatever, the simulation, like,
yeah,
this is
first
probably
percentile outcome.
Yeah, this is the worst outcome possible.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, just like, I didn't even consider Embiid just because he was never available enough. Like, it makes me scratch my head a little bit with your criteria being best chance to win a championship. He did drop in the playoffs. He was routinely never available. And, like, my hang-up with Embiid above everything else...
He was available. He just wasn't 100% in the playoffs.
And that matters to me. My biggest hang-up is the fact that the guy has 12 seasons on the books, right? 10 actually where he was on the court. He misses his first 2 seasons. If we include those first 2 seasons that he missed and include those as total of potential games played, Joel Embiid played in less than 50% of the possible games in his career. If you exclude those, he played in less than 60% of the games of his career. So my hang-up is really just quite simply, availability is a big concern. The cliche is availability is the best ability, and just Embiid's injuries are such a unique... Like, I agree with you. When the guy is on the court, if we were just doing on the court impact, availability, be damned. The guy is probably top 25, top 30, and it's not really debatable with how unstoppable the guy was on the court, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know. Like, when I'm looking at other guys who got omitted from my list, give me Dwight Howard, man. Dwight Howard is going to give me a 4 to 5 year stretch where he's on the court dominating defensively and available.
But Embiid had a 5 year stretch like that. Playoff Embiid is still better than playoff Dwight. Dwight had playoff issues. Dwight's playoff offense was a real problem. Let me ask you this. Is Bill Walton on your list?
Yes.
Bill Walton's injury issues were more significant than Joel Embiid's. Embiid has given us several more elite seasons than Bill Walton did. Bill Walton's on my list.
Handled business and translated to the playoffs better than Embiid ever did. He gave me the run.
But Logan, it's not absolute. Joel Embiid has undoubtedly been failed by his circumstances. I think we can agree on that. And even with the playoff drop, has dramatically improved his teams when he's on the court. And also, yes, we're underwhelmed by the playoff success, but has gotten his team there every year. He's been decently healthy without fail, even though they suck when he's off the court. They're great when he's on the court. Obviously, the health is the reason that I don't have Embiid higher, but it's we can take these, whatever you think it is exactly, 5-6 seasons in which he was flat out playing at a top 5 level. There's not that many dudes in NBA history who have even that. There's another guy we're going to talk about shortly who doesn't have the injury concerns of Embiid, but just hasn't been playing for that long. I'm talking about an active player here, and I have him on my list because the peak is high enough. And with Embiid, the peak is high enough. And even with the health stuff, I do think in better situations, they could have overcome it. Maybe not to win a title, but to have more playoff success than they ultimately did. And what he did in the regular season was just absolutely monstrous year after year. I would take, genuinely, Joel Embiid from 2018 to 2024. And he was still really good this year, whatever. I'll just take Joel Embiid, what he's given me, over Russell Westbrook as my foundation. Because the path to Embiid as that dominant two-way force, he's going to be out there, and I know what the ceiling is. And I know what Embiid can do to carry these teams in a truly ridiculous all-time great way. I'd rather be building around that. I would. I understand the injury's absolutely brutal, but he's done enough when healthy. He's done enough when on the court to still be on this list. Yeah, better playoff performer. Such a better playoff performer than Russell Westbrook. We say, oh, he drops. You have to think about where he's dropping from.
Yeah, no doubt. The guy played less than 50% of the possible games in his career, and I just don't want that guy as a starting point, period. He's not going to play.
But you have Bill Walton, and I know you're going to say, but Walton got it done. But it's we have to acknowledge that there is luck involved in all of these things, and I think the notion that Embiid couldn't get it done is not true. It's not accurate. So when I'm ranking these players, well, we can disagree on that.
I just think he was always too flawed of a player to get it done when healthy, and he was routinely not even healthy.
I think you are taking an extremely critical and pessimistic view of Embiid. If you won't even say there's a world in which he's the best player on a champion.
This is just a career thing. If we were doing just absolute peak, sure, Embiid has to be here. If Embiid had given me more of a convincing run as the number one guy, even close to something that Bill Walton did, maybe I would consider it. This is a guy who...
But we are valuing the totality. And, I love Bill Walton, but you're literally talking about one playoff run.
And Embiid never gave me anything close to that.
He hasn't given you an individual run that good, but he has given you 8 runs in which he's still playing like a top 10 player. Just because he isn't as good as he is in the regular season doesn't mean you just write it off. Because you're certainly not doing that with Russell Westbrook. That's inconsistent.
It's in tandem with the dropping and the availability.
All right. Well, look, again, I think the reasons that anybody would protest Embiid being on this list are obvious. I just disagree with how absolutely you seem to be viewing this situation. I do value what Embiid has done on the court a lot, but ultimately I can't have him higher because of the health really above all else, and how that does limit his ability to give his team the best chance to win and to win it all.
Do you want to stay up to date on all things NBA? Then Reddit is the app for you. From niche stats to historical analysis and wild basketball theories, all from passionate fans who love the game just as much as you do. Whether it's game day or we're deep into the offseason, the conversation never stops on Reddit.
If you want to learn more about the history of the game specifically, you can check out r/vintage NBA, but you can also go to r/NBA for more general conversations. You can join your favorite team subreddit. You have a bunch of different options on Reddit where you can find your community and keep the conversation going, because Reddit is where the real fans hang out. So download the Reddit app and dive into any NBA subreddit for hot takes, memes, and the group chat that never sleeps. Download the Reddit app today. All right. Let's move on to the 47 spot, Logan. Who do you got here?
I have a guy that may surprise people being on this list. I'm kind of intrigued to see if he's going to be on yours. I have Manu Ginobili here on my 47 spot.
I love it. I don't have him. He was another guy who was on the next batch of honorable mentions, but I love Manu, and I am excited to hear the case.
Yeah, I mean, I just think Manu is the most underrated player in NBA history, and I think a lot of people's initial sentiment after hearing that, Manu is here is the fact that he was never a number one, and that, people would probably turn to, you've got Manu on here. Do you have Tony Parker? No, I think Manu was better than Tony Parker
Agreed.
At their best. I think that Manu is one of the most selfless players in NBA history, and the fact that he was willing to take a back seat when Pop asked him to come off the bench and run their bench units, and it was a core and fundamental reason why the Spurs were so successful. His willingness to stagger the minutes, to captain the bench units, and to make those groups great. And you look at his per 36 numbers, the guy's near 26-6 for his entire career, and always scaled up in the playoffs. And again, back to the Tony Parker point, I think a lot of people would go, Parker's got a Finals MVP. Doesn't that override that? The accolades don't really matter to me, like you're saying, Carson. I don't really care if a guy made X amount of all-star games in a weak conference, or if the guy got a Finals MVP. I think Manu was just better. And again,
Manu also probably deserved a Finals MVP in 2005. He was the best player in that series. Literally the only efficient, pretty-looking offensive player in the ugliest defensive series of all time.
I think so, too, and I just think Manu's sacrifice is really important to emphasize when we're talking about him historically, because people will look at his resume and they'll go, he's a two-time All-Star, he's a two-time All-NBA selection. Outside of that, he's a sixth man of the year. You look at it and maybe you're underwhelmed, but when I think about these guys and their skill sets, there just wasn't anything that Manu couldn't do on the basketball court. And a great scorer at every single level. The guy was an elite playmaker and an audacious passer. I think that's my favorite aspect of his game. The fact that, it's really funny looking back and reading articles of Manu as a young player, and they're like, this guy's a wild man. He plays like a freak. He did. And, early on in his Spurs career, you've got people questioning, man, can this guy even cut it in the league? Has he made it? Is he, is he too audacious of a player to make it? And no, he wasn't. He played a really flashy play style, and it was super effective. And I also think he was a really damn good defender, too. Even late into his career as a player, making important defensive plays. I think all of the numbers, the box scores, the accolades, the legacy, I think it's going to underwhelm you if you're looking for that out of Manu. I think you really have to go beyond the box score. You have to look at his skill set, and it's his skill set, his effectiveness offensively, defensively, in a multitude of ways, and it's his malleability that gets him on this list, and his longevity. The fact that I'm getting, I feel 13 really solid seasons from Manu where he's impacting the game on both ends of the court, and he can do it as a lead guy, he can do it as the second guy, he can do it as the third guy. I don't have any of those questions about Manu when I'm starting my squad. And I just really value that versatility, that malleability, and, again, the totality of his skill set. I think Manu is the most underrated NBA player ever. I think he belongs in the top 50, and Yeah, I settled on 47. I just think he's criminally underrated and super skilled, and his sacrifice was a big part of the Spurs' sustained success throughout the 2000s and into the 2010s, man. I love watching Manu play, a crafty lefty, man. I got a soft spot for his game and what he was capable of doing on the court.
Yeah, he's a brilliant basketball player, one of the most underrated. I agree he was better than Tony Parker. Like, the impact that he had throughout his career, the Spurs were just always at their best with him on the court. Regular season, he's got a +7 on off swing. Playoffs, +10 on off swing. Like, Manu came into the game, and he just positively impacted it in so many different ways. Brilliant scorer, both on and off ball, like a pick-and-roll maestro, really efficient isolation player, incredibly effective driver, so crafty, good change in pace, would embrace physicality, really good free throw generator, and then also a good cutter off ball and good in transition and a high-level spot-up shooter and a really brilliant passer and a plus defender. Like, he just was so damn good at the game of basketball. The feel that he had was such a tremendous gift, and he's a great, great player, man. And like you said, I mean, if you put the ball in his hands, you saw what he could do. He was tremendous in the playoffs, especially if you look at 2005 to 2011. His volume goes up, and he's giving you a super efficient 19, 5, and 4. Like, there's no question to me that Manu, if he had just been given a bigger role, could have put up much gaudier box score numbers than he did and probably would get more universal acclaim and appreciation. That being said, as somebody who loves Manu, I do wonder, with you having both him and Worthy here, if you are valuing guys in privileged situations just a little bit too much. And I'm not saying at all that Worthy and Manu are not winners, because I absolutely think they are. It's just top 50 is a really high bar. Like, those guys for me are no-brainer top 75, because their impact does go beyond the box score. And in some ways you would say, oh, they could have done more if they were allowed to be the number one elsewhere. But also, like, neither of them were necessarily built to carry a team. They did really excel in their roles as the second, the third option. And it's just when we're looking at guys who could carry a team, like a Joel Embiid, who I had one spot below this, that's where I do think I'm giving a little bit more credit to those guys. And again, it's like, I think a player like Manu can get overshadowed in some ways by his situation, but I also think you have to acknowledge how good the situation is when it comes to him racking up 4 championships, right? And it's like, absolute winning player, also in a fortunate situation, made that situation way better, but was dropped into a really great infrastructure. And like, for me, top 50, just a little bit high. Similar to like a Draymond Green, where it's like, okay, his skill set alongside Steph Curry, I mean, there are years that he's delivering top 10 value. And I think Manu's like better than Draymond. Though. Okay, but I'm talking about the same principle of like,
I think
elite
applies.
complementary player.
Draymond was literally sent to the, and I'm not saying this is different for Manu either. Draymond, I think, was sent to the best possible situation that could maximize his limitations. And I think Manu went to an ideal situation as well. But I think Manu has a more malleable and versatile skill set where he would have been successful almost anywhere. Whereas Draymond, I think, has some really hard limitations that kind of just get wiped away by how great the situation was with the Warriors.
I agree to some extent. I also think Draymond, no matter where you put him, is one of the 5 or so greatest defenders to ever walk the earth, and was a very unique playmaking talent for being functionally a big, especially when you're talking about his rise 2015, 2016. Like, Draymond's great. Yeah, I think he is even more a beneficiary of the situation, but that's why I went to him as an example, because he's a little bit more extreme, but it's the same principle of absolutely phenomenal contributions to winning, super impactful, great in their situation. Are they in a vacuum top 50? Even as someone who is super high on both those guys, and I think they're 2 of the more underrated players ever, I would probably say not quite, just outside for me. I don't think it's crazy. I'm just noting that because I think we'll see how the rest of your list looks, but I do think you do have to give credit to the guys who were in less fortunate situations, and so they did a lot of heavy lifting. All right. In my 47 spot, I have another international player. This is where I have Luka Doncic. And he's a tough guy to rank just because we are so much still in the midst of his career. But I just don't think you can take for granted that there's not that many guys who have put together 5 to 7 years where they're considered a top 5 player on the planet. And that's what Luka has done since his second year in the league. Like, he has consistently been in that tier. In his career, has averaged 29, 8, and 8 on plus 2% relative true shooting. And one of the great offensive talents we've ever seen. A brilliant combination of scoring and playmaking at his size. And he's been able to slowly change his game over the years and remain a really brilliant offensive player. He's gone from the slimmer, more downhill attack-based player that he was in the early years to adding the strength and the layer of post-up mismatch attacking to now really his game being predicated on just brilliant shot making, the step back three, the floater game stuff he's always been great at, but he's gotten even better there, I would say. All the while, he's always been a genius passer, and so he's just a monster offensive player. He's a monster scorer. He's a monster pick and roll and isolation player. He is absolutely an elite offensive floor raiser, and in the playoffs gives you 31, 9, and 8 on even true shooting percentage, but like that sort of volume translating you also can't take for granted. So I just think he's at a level of offensive greatness, and he's been doing it for long enough, again, 7 years where he's been at this top 5 sort of level, that I have him on my list. There are some knocks with Luka though. Like, I do think the defense being a negative is significant, especially with how we've seen him picked on in some particularly big moments in the playoffs. The turnovers, the rigidity in terms of his style, the general hyperball dominance. Like, the question with him has always been, will always be, does this unlock the highest ceiling for a team? Is this a style that can lead to a championship or lead to a championship as easily as some other greats? When you have a guy who, yes, is a brilliant offensive talent, but not the most efficient, does really dominate the ball, does turn it over at a high clip, is a negative defender. Like, those are flaws that I think have held Luka back from being as impactful maybe as some other greats of this era. And that's where I think the on-off numbers, him having just a plus 3.7 on-off swing, reflects that, where it's like Luka goes off the court and his teams throughout his career have not actually performed dramatically worse. They've obviously been better with him out there, but the difference hasn't been as pronounced as, say, an Embiid over the years, or a Jokic, a Giannis, a Shea, like any of these contemporaries. Still, though, even though I have questions about like that championship formula with Luka, I also think his offense is such a great foundation that if you do really max out the personnel and get that perfect roster build around him, you can win a championship with him as your best guy, especially because I do think the playoff offense has really translated quite well. I mean, the last 2 playoff series were rough for him, but his overall playoff resume is pretty impressive. And so I just think the talent in the peak is already too good to keep him out of the top 50. And specifically when it comes to him versus Embiid, it's interesting, 2 active guys, both have only played around 500 games. I think some people will have very strong opinions about this one way or the other. In terms of the peak, I mean, I think there's a real conversation to be had there. I think Embiid is the better regular season peak, but I think Luka's game has absolutely translated better to the playoffs. I think he's the better playoff player, and the availability edge does matter, right? Like, he's already played 20-something more total games than Embiid, and just the consistency with which he is available start to finish is a meaningful advantage when you talk about, all right, can you win a title with this guy? Is he going to be healthy for the entire year? Luka, this year obviously being an exception, the answer is probably yes. So that's where I landed on him at 47.
So this might be one of our largest discrepancies in player rankings. Ooh. I've got Luka a decent amount higher on my list.
So he's going to be in your top 40. Is that what you're saying?
Maybe higher.
Oh, wow. All right. Very interesting.
I mean, I think that you pointed out like the valid flaws of Luka. I just do still look at him as one of the greatest offensive players of all time. And I agree with you. I think you have to build a unique team around him. But his offense is so translatable, so consistent. That being said, a lot of these active guys, I think, can climb higher than where I currently have them.
Yeah.
Luka is kind of in this unique spot where I could see him actually dropping below where I have him because of my concerns with him moving forward. What I mean by that is, like, just with how his play style has been trending over the past few years, like, I think the start to his career is so impressive that he was this effective out of the gates. He was so elite. I more so just mean with the turnover issues that you're talking about, the rigidity in play style, but more so the settling for the jump shots. Like, that's where I wonder if Luka gets older and older, if he doesn't ever get into shape, if he still has these turnover and shot selection issues, and he is this much of a liability for a team defense the way we've seen him in the playoffs, I could actually see his game aging kind of poorly to the point where I may drop him into my top 40 instead of being a top 30 kind of player.
Okay. So this is going to be a fundamental disagreement of ours. I don't think it should be possible for a player to move backwards, like an active player. If you reevaluate someone's career, right, your opinion changes. That's one thing. I don't think it should be possible for a guy to do something that moves him further down the list. I think you have to earn your position, right? Like, it's what you're saying earlier. For these active guys, they should have done enough already that they're locked into the spot that they're in. Like, I can't see a world where a guy can go backwards. Like, what is he going to do? You know, like, if we're talking about the total impact that a guy makes over their career, how could he possibly go backwards from this point
I think
forward?
Luka's skill has warranted him to where he's at on my list, but he has fundamental flaws that I think could continue.
But if he
to
delivers
get worse
another
and worse.
5 all-star level seasons, even if they're
He'll
not
probably
as
stay
good as
where he's
this,
at.
he should go up. That's more quality seasons.
Well, I don't know.
I think
mean,
this is
it's
just going to be a
depend on-
fundamental disagreement where I think you're probably going to put active guys higher sooner than me. I am valuing longevity here, and that's where it's like Luka's 7 seasons are enough to get him on the list, but I need
think
more
Luka's
than that to
7
have him
seasons
higher.
are above entire careers for guys. I mean, he's just a better player than some of these guys to me, and I would rather take what Luka has delivered to begin his career than what those guys delivered. Like, Luka to me has proven that he is a number one on a champion level of player. He has got that kind of ability.
Yeah, I just think there's enough flaws to where it's like I don't treat his peak like I treat Shai's, for example. And I think you're going to have Shai higher than me too, because I think I'm probably just moving slower with all these guys. But like Shai, I think it's stamped, no question about it, like the level of impact contributing to dominant teams that we've seen out of him. Luka, the flaws have still been significant enough to where he hasn't led to those highest levels of team success. And I just want to wait. I mean, there are dudes who have given you a dozen all-NBA level seasons who were not as good at Luka as their best, but like 5 more all-NBA seasons is 5 more all-NBA seasons of impact. You know, like those are more meaningful years of contributing to great basketball. I just value that a lot. I don't know. I don't want to do anything premature. If, God forbid, Luka were to never play basketball again, he would be number 47 for me. He wouldn't be higher than that. There's no projecting.
I just think he's better than like I said. I mean,
but you said he could move backwards. That shouldn't be possible.
I'm saying if he tails off, if he dramatically gets like he's out of shape, he is getting picked. Like if these things don't
and
ever.
I'm saying like that shouldn't be possible. He cannot have a worse overall career if he plays more basketball at a high level. Period. Even if it's not as good as what he's done. We're not ranking like the average caliber of these guys' seasons. We're talking about their careers and the total impact, and that's where longevity
think this is
matters.
Much too low for a guy like Luka. I think Luka has provided more value.
But Joel Embiid doesn't belong anywhere near the top 50. That doesn't make sense. That doesn't make sense. They have given
Nobody
you the
misses
same amount of
games
seasons
like
of elite
Embiid.
basketball.
Nobody
Actually,
misses
Embiid's giving you
games
more.
like
Bill
Embiid.
Walton misses games more than Embiid. And I don't know
And
where you're going to have
Embiid-
him.
Bill
Your
Walton came
peak
out and was one of
longevity,
the best
double
players
standards.
in the league right out of college.
So did Embiid. What are you
He
talking
missed 2
about?
seasons.
Okay, the
missed
second he
throughout
set
the
foot on the
gate.
floor, he had one of the best rookie seasons this century and then made his team a contender in year 2. The
Bill
team that
Walton
for
won
fucking
the chip
years
with the
before him
youngest group
was the
ever.
most comical case of tanking, the most disgusting, egregious tanking in NBA history. He immediately turned that team into automatic 50 wins every year, even if he missed 30 games, because they were going to win 70% of the games when he was on the court. You need to stop with the Embiid disrespect, man. This is crazy.
I'm not. I'm the only rational Embiid head, bruh. We just try to act like the guy didn't miss over 50% of the games in his career.
Luka missed the season. Luka wasn't good last year in the playoffs. Luka wasn't good in the 2024 finals. How has he done enough to be on here above Embiid?
He's better.
Is he better? Healthy, is he better than Joel Embiid?
You have seen Luka spank people's asses in the playoffs the way Embiid never did.
Embiid massively impact the game, even in the playoffs, even through significant injuries, even when not playing his best. And I have Luka above Embiid, by the way. I don't think
Embiid
Luka
is a playoff performer, and Embiid has missed more time than any star
You
ever.
keep on fucking saying that. It's not true. Bill Walton has missed more time. Bill Walton has way more significant injuries. Bill Walton has 3 good seasons. And in all of them, he still missed significant
in those
time.
3 seasons.
Absolutely.
Give me 3 seasons of Bill Walton over all of Embiid. That is how I feel.
Okay, dude, I feel the same way, actually. But the gap in the double standard with you, where you're saying Embiid doesn't belong in these conversations, but everybody else, a brief peak is fine and great and wonderful, and they don't need to do anything more, it's just inconsistent.
It's translated in a different way than with Embiid.
Bro, what else? Like, Embiid is one of the most impactful regular season players when healthy that we've ever seen.
Yep, exactly. I agree.
All right. You're disrespecting Joel Embiid, and the Philly mob is going to come for you. All right, who's in your 46 spot?
Bruh.
Bro, wait until you hear Bill Walton's number. It's like fucking 20-something%.
And he was the best player on a championship team.
And Embiid could have been if the circumstances aligned.
I've got Chris Webber in my 46
But you know that Luka
spot.
can be a number 1 on a championship team. It doesn't matter that
he
hasn't come close
yes.
to doing it, that he got to the finals once and got that ass beat and was a disgrace in that series. That doesn't matter at all. We write that off. That's fine. Joel Embiid couldn't do it, could never do it. Ridiculous. All right, who's in your 46 spot?
I have Chris Webber in my 46 spot.
Whoa! C-Web. You can't compartmentalize. You must compartmentalize. Okay, you're a lot higher on C-Web than me. Make the case.
He's just such a versatile and impactful big man, and Webber is unique in the sense that he also has one of the briefer peaks of anybody on my list, but just so ahead of his time and what he could.
C-Web above Embiid. I'm going to throw up.
Chris Webber was available.
Chris Webber's teams were better with him off the court throughout his prime. Are you aware of that?
Joel Embiid never played basketball.
Well, that's not true. Joel Embiid saved basketball for the people of Philadelphia. Anyways, go ahead.
I mean, he comes into Sacramento, and they are one of the bottom dwellers. I mean, first of all, what a stupid trade from Washington to acquire old-ass Mitch Richmond for a guy like Webber. I know that Webber and his coach at the time had major issues, and that's why he had, it was with the Warriors, and then it was funky with the Wizards, and they had all that drama going on with all of their players, and I think they wanted to set the culture. What a stupid trade, though, trading for old-ass washed Mitch Richmond and giving up on a guy like Chris Webber. But Webber steps in. The first season is lockout short in 99. They win 27 games, and then they go to 44-55, and then the pinnacle is that 02 season where they win 61 games. And I think that's a great basketball team top to bottom. The Kings deserve a lot of credit for just building a great roster out. But Webber, to me, as a starting point, is just such a versatile and impactful big man, like one of the best rebounders in basketball at his apex, one of the best playmakers and ball handlers at his size. And the one big knock I think I would have on Webber is the fact that he was a bit of a playoff dropper as well. The scoring didn't translate as well to the playoffs as some of these other guys, but I just think is giving you impact at a position where guys just couldn't do what he was capable of, the rebounding, the playmaking, the scoring, and the defense. I just think he was really ahead of his time. Again, I think the knocks would be the really brief peak and then the scoring not translating as well to the playoffs, but I just think he's got a really versatile skill set that other guys don't have. And then, I don't think Chris Webber peaked as high as a guy like Joel Embiid, but I'm figuring I'm taking these guys from their rookie seasons and just taking their careers, and I just think a guy like Embiid is always going to have these debilitating injuries where he never plays.
Yeah, because Chris Webber didn't have significant injuries. Yeah, because Chris Webber had great longevity. What are we doing here? What are we doing? This is the first one that I just can't see at all. I mean, I can see it for Manu. I can see it for Worthy. I like those guys. Chris Webber, No, man. I'm
Weber's
sorry.
one of those guys that I just always come back to and wonder how different his legacy is looked upon.
Oh, now we do what ifs. Interesting.
No. Let's not do this because Weber made a 60-win team.
Oh,
he
got
to the Western Conference
You're going to argue he was
Finals.
more impactful than Joel Embiid?
He got to the Western Conference Finals.
In his time in Sacramento, you know what percentage of the games they won without him? 68%. They were 88-41 without Chris Webber. You know what percent they won with him? 64%. They won a higher percentage of their games without him. They were brilliantly coached. They had a brilliant offensive infrastructure. Pedro was probably the most valuable player on a couple of those teams. Bibby was awesome. Christie was awesome. Vlade, Brad Miller, those were awesome basketball teams that consistently excelled without Webber on the court. He was a playoff dropper. He was a really inefficient scorer, and I like C-Web. I do. I think he's fun to watch because I love great passing big men, period, point blank, but you got me all fucking riled up now about this Embiid double standard. Like, no, man, if the fucking problem is playoff dropping and availability, like, how the fuck is Chris Webber passing that test? And in terms of impact, he doesn't pass that test. He should not be on the top 50.
50%.
Bro, that's not a good point. You're saying that because you have nothing else to say to the fact that Joel Embiid is very clearly a substantially better basketball player than Chris Webber.
I would rather have Chris Webber. I know Weber's going to play.
Could you imagine if you dropped Joel Embiid on the early 2000s Kings? If you put Joel Embiid on a team that could win 70% of their games without him, oh my God. Nuclear.
What is this thought exercise, man? You could do this with anybody. Let me put Luka Doncic on the 0-2 Kings, and they win 80 games.
Well, the point is that some guys like Joel Embiid, their teams suck without him, and they're great with him. And then some guys like Chris Webber, their teams are actually better when he's not on the court because he's just on a really great team and a really fortunate
I just
situation.
don't agree with that sentiment that Webber was like a loser. I just don't agree with that.
No, I'm not saying he's a loser. I'm saying he's not nearly as good as Joel Embiid, and I'm saying for the rest of his entire career,
I agree with that when they're on the court, but
teams.
Availability is important to me.
And Chris Webber's availability is one of his biggest problems as a player. He was very consistently injured. Played 830 career games. It's not a lot of basketball. And the last few years were rough because his body gave out.
No, the longevity, I agree with that. Like, the peak is not super long, but he's super versatile. I do think he's really impactful, and I think the fact that they got fucked. Let's not, like, dress it up. They got fucked in Game 7. I wonder how different Chris Webber's legacy if that game is not fucking rigged. If he gets to the finals and the Kings win a chip and we look at him way differently, and that is a what if where I'm not putting a cart before the horse. Like, that was objective reality that happened. They got boned in Game 7. That was a rigged series.
Everything I have said is objective reality about how Embiid has been failed and about how Chris Webber
and
was
Embiid failed the Sixers more than the
situation.
Sixers failed Embiid. That's my sentiment.
A ridiculous fucking statement to make. That is a ridiculous statement to make. He saved that franchise from where they were at. And
he had what, Carson? 5 good playoff games.
Oh my God, you need to stop it. And with Chris Webber, this is the point of comparison, one of the most notorious playoff droppers in NBA history. Stop it, Logan. Get some help. We need to move on from Embiid. This is going nowhere, but I really dislike you having Webber on this list. Genuinely, I think it, to me, is not justifiable. But in my 46th spot, I have the most injured great player in NBA history. This is where I have Bill Walton. And we really only get 4 seasons before injuries basically ruined his career. Obviously, there's the magical resurgence in 86 with the Celtics, but that's in a bench role. His 2-year peak in 77 and 78, though, is arguably a top 15 peak in NBA history. I would argue it's the second best peak of the 1970s, only after Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, and that's why I have to have him on my list. It's a balancing act, right? And this is what I was feeling with him, with Luka, with Embiid, all of these guys, where with Luka, I mean, we just haven't seen as much because he's younger. With Walton and Embiid, the peaks that are so shortened and affected by injury. But I think out of those 3, Walton still gave me the most, even though it was for the briefest period of time. The value when he was on the court was so supreme. I mean, over those 2 years, the Blazers went 92 and 31 with him. they were 15 and 26 without him. It's like the biggest 2-year difference in a team's performance with and without a player in NBA history. In full games that he played, they had a plus 15.7 net rating with him and a minus 4.8 net rating without him. Think about it. That is a 20.5 point swing in net rating. That is heights that, like, in the play-by-play era, we have only seen KG, LeBron, Jokic, Steph touch in a single season. And that's over a large sample size. It's insane. And even with the time he missed, in which they were a disaster, right? Like 1978, famously, they're 50 and 10 when Walton gets hurt. They go 8 and 14 without him down the stretch. Even with the time he missed, the Blazers were so dominant when he played that they finished both of those seasons number 1 in net rating and top 5 on both sides of the ball. And when he was on the court, they were essentially the best offense and defense in the NBA, and they sucked without him. But, like, think about that, dude. A plus 16 net rating in games that he played over 2 years. That would be the greatest net rating in a single season in NBA history. That's what they did when Bill Walton just played. So you can look at the box score stuff, but, like, his impact is so much greater than that. He was by far the best player on both sides of the ball for the dominant team in the NBA at this time that won a title and then was on a historic pace the next year before he got hurt and the team fell apart. He's one of the best rim protectors ever, just phenomenal defensive instincts, massive deterrent, monstrous rebounder. That was his greatest strength as a player. He's got one of the 15 highest defensive peaks ever, and he was a true offensive engine, a brilliant passer you could run offense through in so many ways. Handoffs, his outlet passing was brilliant. He was an exceptional playmaking hub out of the post, the best we've probably ever seen at spotting cutters, and easily the best passing center ever before Jokic popped up. And the one knock on him on the court would be his playoff offense being held back a bit in the one deep run that we saw by the lack of elite scoring, but still he was utterly dominant and the most impactful two-way player on the planet, and that translated in a remarkable way to a championship. So this is probably the hardest stretch of the list for me, these last few names that we've gone through, and specifically Bill Walton is so tough because you're trying to figure out what do you do with this brilliant peak that just wasn't sustained for nearly as long. Ultimately, I did feel like everybody above him delivered more total value, gave me overall the best chance at winning more championships. And this is an area in which I think my criteria is different from, like, some of these conversations we've had before where, like, I value Walton's peak so much and I'm like, he's just better at basketball. It's kind of like what you're saying about Luka, right? He's better at basketball than some guys who I'm going to have above him. And I agree with that. But those guys did it for a lot longer. And if you are really good for a long time, it's an extremely valuable thing. So that's where I couldn't go higher than this with Walton, but he had to be on my list because when he was on the court at his best, he's one of the greatest players in NBA history, bar none.
Yeah, I have Walton higher on my list.
All right. I guess we will get back to this next episode. I don't know, at some other point. It's interesting. I think I can see where we're differing in our criteria here. Who is next for you, Logan?
I've got your boy Reggie Minion at my next spot.
Reggie Minion. Okay, he is not in this section of the list for me. Why do you have him here?
I've got Reggie here because he's one of the most impactful offensive players ever. And like Jimmy Butler, I think the raw numbers and Basketball Reference page can sell short how effective Reggie was as a player. Just a 5-time All-Star, 3-time All-NBA selection, but just ahead of his time in terms of what he can do for a team offense. And we only have these numbers for the final 6 seasons of Reggie's career, the on-off differential, courtesy of Data Baller. And this is at the tail end of Reggie's career, your age 35 to 39 seasons. He's improving the Pacers' offense by 5 points with him on versus off. And his skill set, and this is a reason why I think you can make a pretty convincing and strong argument that Reggie should be higher than some of these other guys, is just because of how gracefully his game aged. Like, because his game was so heavily predicated on pure jump shooting, off-ball movement, relocation, working to get to open space, that's how a guy is impactful from the day he enters the league at 22 to the day he leaves at 39. That's from 1987 to '05, man. That's 18 years of value. So I think there's a very strong argument that his longevity should have him higher on this list. Ultimately, I leaned on the side of guys peaking a little bit higher than Reggie. But like I said, I think that the raw numbers, the fact that he's at 18, 3, and 3 for his career can kind of sell him short. One, I think it's important to mention just how efficient the guy is. He's basically 47% from the field and 39.5% from deep, basically a 40% shooter on nearly 5 attempts per game for his career, which, again, to contextualize, is kind of unheard of from a player in this era. Guys were not putting up volume three-point numbers like this when he played, and that's why his value is so unique, because he's so ahead of his time. 61.4% true shooting for his career. He's got a fucking damn near 11-year run where he's over 60% true shooting, and twice he leads the league in true shooting. The raw numbers aren't going to do him justice. Like, such a difficult cover for when he played, and again, his game aged so gracefully that I can really see Reggie being higher. There are guys' games that I just prefer in terms of on-ball, self-creation, isolation, ball handling. Guys' games I just prefer raw. Their skill set's more than Reggie.
Oh my.
But
the cameras are rolling. Still doing the show.
But I do understand an argument where Reggie's longevity overrides some of those guys whose skill sets you may prefer. But ahead of his time, really underrated, and a very unique offensive engine in the time he played. I think Reggie Minion has to be on this list.
I love Reggie Minion. I do have him higher than this. I think he, as much as anybody ever, is just like screwed by the accolades and the counting stats. Like, they totally sell short his impact. He was an extremely lean, ridiculously efficient offensive engine whose scoring threat fueled great team offense for a long time. I mean, 1990 to 2000, he led 9 top 8 offenses, 2 number 1 offenses. Just the longevity is insane. The efficiency is top tier all time. And he's probably the GOAT off-ball mover. Like, absolutely incredible in his ability to set a defender up and read off-ball screens and just consistently get free, and that's so valuable. It's so much harder to guard a team or a player that constantly forces you to make decisions and worry about their scoring threat from all over the floor and bring them out into space, and you always have to stay attached, and like that just makes life so much easier on everybody around him. And outside of Steph Curry, Reggie was the best ever at that. And so that's where I think he belongs higher for me. Also a massive playoff riser, just a brilliant, brilliant playoff scorer. And 18 years of strong offensive impact is nuts. And what he was doing in his mid-30s, at 34, he's the best player on a finals team. At 35 and 36, he's averaging 27 a game in the playoffs on plus 10% relative true shooting. I just think absolute scoring machine, made his team's offenses substantially better for a long time, especially valuable in the playoffs. I do have Reggie Minion higher, and I'll give another spiel about him next episode. In my 45 spot, Logan, I have Paul Pierce, who I feel like wound up a little bit higher than I maybe would have expected, but he just had such a good career and is really just a pretty awesome all-around forward, elite scorer, big physical driver, free throw drawing machine, but also like a fringe elite level jump shooter. Great from mid-range and really good from deep. Very solid passer, especially as he matured, and just an extremely well-rounded offensive player. He was awesome as a post-up scorer, an isolationist, a spot-up player, a pick-and-roll player. He could see over the top and make reads, and he could score on every level, and just did a lot to pressure a defense and impact the game positively in a lot of different ways, because he's also a slight plus defender. He had good physical tools and like meaningfully contributed to some elite Celtics defenses while he was offensively the number 1 option, and made those offenses a lot better. I mean, over the big 3 years, the Celtics offenses were 7.5 points better with Paul Pierce on the court. But I think the most underrated part of his resume by far is everything he did before the big 3, because all three of those guys had been failed by their situations, and we always talk about KG first just because he's in a different level as a talent than Paul Pierce. But what the Celtics put around him, especially offensively, was disgusting. He was carrying awful offenses, and over the 7 years before they built the big three, a plus 8.2 offensive on-off swing, Logan. I mean, that is elite offensive engine kind of impact. And overall, across his 15 years in Boston, a plus 7 on-off swing. So Paul Pierce, really impactful. And you know what else speaks to that? His team's performance in games without him. This is a ridiculous stat. From 1999 to 2007, so the pre-Big Three era, Logan, he got the Celtics to win 48% of their games when he was on the court. Decent. Without him, they went 9-45. They won 16% of their games without Paul Pierce. They were incompetent, and he got them to be legit respectable. And then with the big three, from 2008 to 2013, they were elite with him on the court. They won 68% of their games. They went just 10-15 without him, 40%. So that's a smaller sample, but like overall, there's just a lot that is pointing to a very impactful, underrated, all-around awesome basketball player here who had quite a strong offensive peak with plus defense and also just sustained his level as a star for a long time. He gives you 13 years of star level impact. That's a rare thing. So he never reached the top 5 level. That's why I can't have him higher than this. But he was really damn good for a long time and was consistently top 10, top 15 with a skill set that you can see contributing to winning in so many different situations, which I do value. And I mean, he did it as a floor raiser, underrated there. He did it with more talent around him. And so I do have Paul Pierce in my 45 spot.
Yeah, Pierce is a valid guy to have here. And I do think he's just a kind of a prototype in terms of how ahead of his time he was too, man. The big forward who can handle, who can kill you at all 3 levels, the step-back jumper, like you hear about James Harden always giving Pierce credit for his shot diet and how he played. Like, Pierce is one of those guys that was really ahead of his time. And like you said, I think because he gets a title with that team can kind of get overshadowed for how great he actually was in the 2000s.
Yeah.
I feel good about my list. I feel good about Pierce. Pierce should have been a higher honorable mention for me. He's a really good shout here.
Yeah, shout out Paul Pierce, man. Shout out. Better known now for shitting his pants, but definitely
renting
a
women.
Scoring machine.
Yep.
That as well.
Smoking loud.
Sure, all of the above. But he is a really fun watch. I mean, he's just so big, he's so strong, and he's so methodical and so skilled. Like, he's just good at everything. Like, one of those guys who's good at everything, and those hyper-versatile forwards, like, I'm always going to value, especially when they have the sort of scoring ability that a Paul Pierce does. All right, who's in your 44 spot, Logan?
So, I've got, like, an archetype break here. These guys are almost inseparable to me. I've got Ray Allen here in my 44 spot, and like Reggie, I considered having Ray higher because of his longevity and the fact that his game scaled so well and aged so gracefully because of how elite of a jump shooter he was. I mean, you know, even down to the last seasons of Ray Allen, he's hitting big shots on the Heatles after hitting big shots for Boston, after carrying offenses like Milwaukee and Seattle. And I know you bring up this fact all the time on the show when we talk about Ray Allen, but can just get underrated as an offensive engine for what he was doing. 2000 leads out the number 2 offense in basketball. 2001 leads out the best offense in basketball. And then from 04 to 06 with Seattle leads out a top 3 offense in basketball every season. And throughout that time period is improving the Sonics offense by 9 points offensively in terms of on-off differential. And I think can kind of just get pigeonholed into this catch-and-shooter role when you think of an older Ray Allen. You know, those memories kind of stick out a little bit more, like we're talking about with Paul Pierce, him being a contributor on a great basketball team, where that may be what you think of first with Ray Allen because he's got some big moments. And one of the biggest shots in NBA history, that Game 6 bucket. But you can kind of forget what an athlete and what a special ball handler and tough shot maker he was in the 2000s with Milwaukee and Seattle, when I think he was at his absolute apex and one of the best offensive engines in basketball. So I think you can make an argument like Reggie for Ray being higher because of his longevity, but there are guys, like I mentioned with Reggie, more two-way value I feel like I'm getting with some other guys, and some offensive engines that maybe didn't do it for as long as a guy like Ray did, but offensive engines that I think peaked higher than a guy like Ray. But in the grand scheme of things, I think an underrated offensive engine, a guy whose game aged really, really gracefully, and a guy who just belongs here in the top 50. So I've got Mr. Allen here in my 44 spot.
Logan, I feel like we have disagreed an uncharacteristic amount this episode. I also have Ray Allen in my 44 spot, though. So Ray Allen is objectively the 44th greatest player in NBA history. I do agree, like you said, he's one of the more underrated offensive engines ever, who was also a phenomenal complementary offensive player. I mean, he and Reggie are similar in that way. I do think Reggie reached different heights of efficiency, different heights of playoff scoring, and ultimately was a different level of off-ball threat, and that's why I do have Reggie a few spots higher. Also, though, Ray was a better ball handler, a slightly better passer, a better off-the-dribble shooter, and so there's definitely some advantages he has. I just think overall Reggie was the better offensive player, and the playoff stuff really does matter. But also Ray had some great playoff runs. And like you said, I mean, just leading to top 3 offenses year after year across Milwaukee and Seattle, and leading 8 straight top 8 offenses. It's worth noting that those teams were all very offensively slanted, especially when you look at Seattle. Like, they were very ahead of their time in terms of where they were at with the pick and roll attack, really emphasizing three-point shooting across the board, like having multiple stretch bigs, Rashard Lewis, even like a Vlad Radmanovic, and they just had some underrated offensive players. Brent Barry in Ray Allen's early years there, one of my favorite, most underrated offensive players of that era, high field passer, great shooter. So, like, it was a good offensive situation, especially at the start. It tailed off at the end of his time in Seattle. But as you said, Ray still dramatically improved those offenses. I mean, a 9-point offensive on-off swing is massive stuff, and he's leading you to like a +7 relative offense when he's on the court in Seattle. Like, basically the best offenses outside of Phoenix for a couple years were Ray Allen's in Seattle, and he does not get enough credit for that. Overall, doesn't get enough credit for what he did as a number one. And I think 2001, man, like, Game 7 goes another way. We look at that run from Ray Allen and we're like, oh my God, because he was clearly the best player in that series against Allen Iverson. He had some unbelievable performances and gave you like a super efficient 27 a game on +10% relative true shooting. It was an incredible run. And throughout that postseason, the Bucks had a 110 offensive rating with him on, which was elite at that time, and an 85 offensive rating without him. Like, just disgusting.
Ironic that, I don't know, just that they met in college so prominently and then again as stars in the playoffs, you know?
True, 100%. But I do think, like, this is where AI, again, gets all of the acclaim of being the guy in a finals run. But it's like, man, Ray Allen led better offenses as the guy for 8 straight years and, like, was on the verge of being the guy who was in the finals that year and was the better player head-to-head in that very series. So I am a big Ray Allen guy, and obviously just a lethal movement and spot-up shooter, but also high-level off-the-dribble shooter and underrated in terms of his driving and solid passing in his time. Like, yes, he was definitely helped by good offensive infrastructure in Milwaukee and Seattle both, but it was pretty easy to build an elite offense around Ray Allen at his best. And in 37 playoff games across Milwaukee and Seattle, he gave you 25, 5, and 5 on +8.5% relative true shooting. So, like, his playoff scoring resume at his best was no joke. And then we go to Boston, and his offensive volume actually drops a bit in the playoffs compared to the regular season, but his impact was consistent. Like, in the Celtics years, he's got a +9.5 point offensive on-off swing. He's one of those guys where he's just incredibly valuable by being on the court because his spacing impact is so pronounced, his shooting threat is so constant. And so when he showed that ability to be a great offensive number 2 and even a great offensive role player in Miami, and then he also showed the ability to be the number 1 on elite offenses when he had the right support system, and he throughout his career made his team substantially better when he was on the court. I love Ray Allen. And it was actually really tough between him and Paul Pierce because I do think Pierce was the better player when they were in Boston together. I think the defensive edge is there for Pierce, but I do feel like Ray Allen was the more impactful offensive player at his best. And I think actually his pre-Big Three resume is a little bit stronger than Pierce's, but the longevity is a bit better. And the longevity is really good for both of these guys, but like for 18 years, Ray Allen was a clear impact offensive player. And Paul Pierce just had a few years at the end where he did like meaningfully fall off a bit. But both of them, I mean, you're talking about 18 and 19-year careers. And just to reiterate, that's why I have them as high as I do. I obviously don't think that they're as good as Luka at his best or Bill Walton or Joel Embiid. But, I mean, you're talking about, for both these guys, like 13 years of stardom, a handful more years of being still a useful player. That matters. That adds up. So shout out to Ray Allen at number 44. Who's in your 43 spot, Logan?
In my 43 spot, I have got a guy that I know is not on your list. It did surprise me a little bit.
Okay.
I've got Damian Lillard here at 43. And I think the knock on Dame would be, like you mentioned earlier, I think defense is very important. I think the fact that Dame is always going to be, even in comparison to other guys that we're talking about that may be limited, one of the worst defenders that we're going to talk about in the top 50.
Yeah.
And the other knock I would say, maybe the worst. Yeah, that's very valid. And I think you can probably say his peak isn't as long as some of these other guys. That being said, I do think Damian Lillard is one of the most underrated guards and underrated players in NBA history solely because of the time period and the conference that he played in. The fact that he is overlapping and getting overshadowed by Stephen Curry, by James Harden, by Russell Westbrook, by Chris Paul. Like, I don't think Dame sticks out as like a step below. Like, obviously, like a Curry, he's a step below. And, like, I think these guys peaked higher. I
think he peaked higher than Russ. I would take Dame over Russ.
I would too, and that's why I've got Dame over Russ. I think Dame is a better and more malleable offensive piece, and we talk about, for people that may disagree with any of my spots here or the totality of my list, one of the most difficult things, like you said, Carson, was separating players from their situation. And that is where I just have to give Dame a ton of credit for elevating his situation. The guy never left Portland. His second best player was C.J. McCollum, and like he has just got
he did eventually leave Portland, but then he came back.
He did. I'm just saying that, for the prime of his career, Dame is sticking it out. He's riding it out with these rosters that aren't really up to snuff in comparison to some of these other teams. And again, when you're playing in a conference where you end up with 6 All-Star appearances over your prime. He ends up with 7 in Portland through 2023. But he's not a perennial All-Star. He is getting overshadowed by some of the greatest individual guard seasons of all time. And so you can kind of take for granted the fact that, the accolades aren't overwhelming. The playoff resume isn't insane. He only has one really deep playoff run in 2019. I think the guy's one of the most underrated offensive engines in basketball history. He is a top 5 to 10 shooter in NBA history with what the guy can do off distance, off movement, off relocating. I don't think this was his best strength. I think his best strength was the fact that he could kill you as a pull-up jump shooter, that he could dissect you out of pick and roll and kill you out of isolation. But the fact that Dame could play off-ball sometimes is a plus for me, where I think that Dame, in an ideal scenario, could scale up, whereas, I'm skeptical of a guy like Russ scaling up alongside another star. And, and he did it in certain situations. I just trust Dame to do it a little bit better. I think his game scaled to the playoffs better than a guy like Russ. So you can have Dame off your list. I completely understand it. I just think he is a special offensive engine at the guard spot. And I don't want to overlook that fact. Like, at his peak, man, from 2016 to 2023, the guy's given you nearly 28 points per game and 7 assists per game, and he's shooting 37% from behind the arc on 9 attempts a night. Like, I just think we can kind of overlook how elite Dame was as an offensive engine. And when I look at him in comparison to some of these other guys, like a Ray, like a Reggie, I think their longevity surpasses what Dame can provide you, and I understand having those guys over Dame because of that. I just prefer Dame's on-ball skill set and what he can do as your lead ball handler in comparison to some of these other guys that he's above. And I think he's doing this in a situation that was really, really difficult, where he didn't have a team that you felt like could go and contend for a championship and really maximized what those teams could do. So in the grand scheme of things, I just think Dame is a really underrated all-time point guard.
Yeah, I get it. And Dame was my literal toughest cut from this list. I do think he's one of the great modern offensive engines, one of the best pick and roll scoring guards ever, one of the GOAT pull-up three-point shooters with ridiculous range, who paired that with a really elite downhill attack and big-time foul drawing, and his ability to stress a defense in such extreme ways with his elite scoring simplified his job as a passer and made him a pretty valuable playmaker even without being a natural passer. And he just led to elite team offense. Like, overall, in 11 years in Portland, improved those offenses by 9.5 points. Like, that's crazy. And over his 11 years in Portland, they won 55% of their games with him, just 35% of their games without him. Now, he missed more games towards the end of his tenure in Portland when they were just a worse team. But even if you compare within the year, like, they were fine with Dame in 2022 when they were terrible without him. Like, so when he did miss time, they fell off in a big way. And so I totally see the case. And to have the combination of massive offensive volume with efficient scoring that he does, keeping turnovers pretty low, like, you just can't deny what he did offensively. He led to 3 straight top 3 offenses from 2019 to 2021, and he led to a +5 relative offensive rating over 11 years when he's on the court. And the longevity overall is quite solid, especially for a guard when you consider that he came into the league and was immediately a star. So, like, we have 13 years of Dame, and to varying degrees, I would say it's 13 years of star-level impact. The criticisms of Dame, though, I think the thing that, again, I came back to when it was him versus Zeke is that he is a significant negative defensively. And that posed a real challenge in terms of the Blazers' team build. The fact that he and CJ as a backcourt, like, there was just such a difficult path to them being a serious defense with those two, that the Blazers were never like a contending caliber team. Even in 2019, they got their ass beat by the Warriors without Kevin Durant. So I would argue maybe that's more the fault of Portland, that they put Dame with another defensive liability in the backcourt, but also, like, their offenses weren't the same overall when Dame was out there without CJ. CJ was valuable in that way. So I think that's a challenge that you have with Dame. And I think maybe the thing that doesn't get talked about as much is Dame does have some playoff issues. Like, his playoff efficiency meaningfully drops off, and the Blazers really didn't have good playoff offenses. I think because he has, 2 of the great shots in playoff history, people think, oh, Dame's a riser, it's Dame time. But he also has that ridiculous 55-10 game against the Nuggets. Like, he has moments, but the Blazers were like well below average playoff offense with him on the court over his tenure there. And I think he ran into some issues in terms of his 2-point scoring, struggled in terms of finishing, really struggled in terms of the mid-range shot. And I also think his lack of high-level passing was exploited at times. So that was another thing that mattered to me with Dame. Regular season, I think he's there. I think he's a sneaky playoff dropper. And then I guess the other question with Dame more broadly is just, could he have been a better player if he were utilized more off ball, if he had embraced that, if he had tried to be more like a Steph Curry Jr. in that way, which he just never did. He was a good shooter off the catch, but it was always on low volume. He was never a super willing off ball mover. So maybe they didn't max out his offensive skill set. I think it's very easy to make a case for Dame at 43. Ultimately, I think I just come down maybe being a little bit lower on his flaws than you. I mean, when it comes to the highs, we're probably in agreement. Like, what he could do as a regular season offensive engine was incredible. But I do think there were also some pitfalls in terms of building around Dame that he does bear responsibility for.
Yeah, I mean, I think there are some pitfalls, and I think you laid them out really well. I just don't ever think Portland put kind of,
I mean, it was Mo Harkless and Al Amino out
that's
there
what I'm
on
saying.
the
Is
wings
like
for a long time.
they just never put a squad around him where I was like, oh yeah, Dame really underachieved with that squad. Like,
Yeah, I see what you're saying for sure, but I think also some of Portland's shortcomings in terms of the team build, I think has kind of bailed Dame out of some of his playoff underperformance, where people are just like, they didn't do him justice. And it's like, well, he also didn't play great.
I don't know. I think the level of offensive engine that Dame was at his absolute apex gets him on this list. But like I said, I understand with his flaws, with the longevity of other guys just doing it for way longer and providing you more holistic overall value, not just offensive. I understand you leaving him off here. But like I said, I just think Dame can kind of get overlooked sometimes in this overshadowed, group of all-time point guards that he was up against in the Western Conference at the same time. So
I agree.
I don't know.
He was like the poster boy for all-star snubs for a while because he had some ridiculous seasons like 2016, 2017 back-to-back, and he doesn't even get an all-star spot.
To be honest, what did it for me, though, is I was like, if I'm going to have Russ on this list, I have to have Dame. I can't have one without, like, if I'm going to put Russ, I would take Dame over him, and so I had to get him on this list.
I think there's a better case for Dame than Russ. I just think Dame is a better offensive player. I do think he's a better playoff performer than Russ. I just fear with Russ the decision-making stuff, like the ugliness of that. We just saw it so many times. I can't overlook it. I can see a world where if the Blazers did put the ideal team build around Dame, he could have gotten you to a finals, whatever. Like, he's certainly that caliber of player. All right. In my 43 spot, I have another Portland Trailblazer. This is where I have Clyde Drexler, who was one of my favorite old players because he's just so unique and so weird by modern standards. It's always hilarious to me that, like, this guy was a shooting guard whose handle and jumper were mediocre, but he was still a top 5 player at his peak because he was an elite transition scorer. He was an elite cutter. He's probably the GOAT offensive rebounding guard. He averaged like 2.5 offensive rebounds a game in his career. He was a very strong passer, really good in transition, lay down specialist, really good interior passer when he pressured the basket, and just a crazy vertical athlete who like weaponized his bounce and ability to pressure the rim in a bunch of different ways. Great finisher, great hang time. Like, I just think it highlights the difference between how much the game really used to be played at the rim and how important vertical athleticism was. And obviously that remains the case, but it's just different now. And Clyde was a great athlete, and he was just a really good all-around basketball player with a really good peak, 1988 to 92. He's giving you a pretty efficient 25, 7, and 6 with slight plus defense, and he's the best player on some pretty elite teams. And overall in his Blazers tenure, 84 to 95, they won 61% of their games with him. That's a strong mark to sustain over 12 years. They did win 52% without him, which I do think is a testament to the fact that those were some more really good teams. Once again, let's shout out Rick Adelman for just coaching up some really good teams and some really good offenses. Terry Porter was a great offensive engine, and they just had a lot of talent on those teams. But Clyde was the through line. Clyde was ultimately the driving force, and them having 8 top 10 offenses in his first 9 years. And so the infrastructure was good, but there's no doubt he took them up a level. And then goes to Houston and contributes to a championship as a number 2, being dropped into a team that had won the title the year before, but a team that was struggling in the regular season before he got there. And he steps up and is ultimately a very good Robin to Akeem's Batman. And it's kind of a similar story in Houston where over those 4 years, they win 54% of their games without Clyde. Like, they play reasonably well. They win 61% of their games with him, though. So once again, he is taking the team to the next level. But you acknowledge that, like, it's not like he was asked to do some crazy floor raising. Like, he was put in good situations throughout his career, and he took advantage. He got to a finals as the guy, and he won a championship as the number 2. But I do think there are still ultimately some more impactful players above Clyde who maybe weren't as lucky in terms of their situation and therefore don't have a championship. But I really do like Clyde, just a very good all-around player, elite rebounder, strong passer, good scorer, just checked a lot of boxes and led to a lot of really good teams, made a lot of good teams better over the years.
Well said. This is actually originally where I had Clyde, and then I
Oh.
called a late audible to move him into my top 40. So
Okay.
he's not too much higher on my list. But when I put him up against another guy, I just prefer Clyde's all-around game. I think you said it really well, man. Clyde just provides you value in a lot of different ways. That's unique. The playmaking, the rebounding, the scoring. Like, he does have his limitations, but he's a complete player. And like you said, man, as the number one, gave you a pretty high floor and got to a finals, right? And then as the number two, really kicked the Rockets up a notch and did it in both ways. So I'm Clyde's grown on me, man. I didn't used to really appreciate Clyde all that much, but I think he's
fun.
kind of underrated historically.
He's fun, and we will never see a player that looks anything like him again. So it's always fun to just look back and see how much the NBA has changed and how he was able to succeed in a way that was unique even in that time. So shout out to him. Who is in your 42 spot, Logan?
So I have Gary Payton here in this spot
Okay.
for me, and basically just head-to-head versus Dame was what I was settling on. Who would I rather have? And it's kind of the two-way argument that you made with Zeke. I do just prefer the fact that Gary is an all-defense caliber guy and can provide me that point of attack value. That being said, I think Gary can kind of get underrated as an offensive player as well. In his time with Seattle, they're a top 10 offense every single season in Seattle. That's 12 of them that he's leading out, and a lot of that is due to his, consistent elite decision-making. He's up near 8 assists at his absolute apex, but he's hovering around 7 basically for his entirety in time in Seattle. And 4 of those offenses were top 3, so I just think he can kind of get a little underrated as the leading decision maker and playmaker for those Seattle offenses. I can take some issue with some of Gary's leadership. Famously, that's what gets him shipped out of Seattle, his hot-headedness with his teammates, but I think that came from a place of wanting his teams to be great. Gary ends up being one of these guys in the 90s that just comes up just short where, I wonder how we look differently at some of these guys. If it's Clyde getting a ring, if it was Patrick Ewing, and Gary ultimately gets walled off from getting a ring and has some great Seattle teams.
He gets one in 06 as a role player, but yeah.
Yeah, I just mean as the lead guy, we would look at him a little bit differently. Those are some really great Seattle teams alongside with Sean Kemp, Detlef Schrempf.
Yeah.
Those are some really great squads that he had with him in Seattle. But I do think Gary was the best player on those teams. And like I said, an elite point of attack guy, a really good decision maker and playmaker, and just consistently trotted out really good two-way teams throughout his tenure in Seattle. I think he had some scoring limitations in the playoffs really early on in his career, but he gets better there as he ages on. Ultimately, I think there are some guys that have better longevity than Payton, sustained it a little bit better into those later seasons. He's basically done by the time he gets to Milwaukee as a star. And then, like you mentioned, he does get a ring as a role player where he scales down. But I do have a certain level of confidence in Gary scaling his role down if he, wasn't the lead guy because of some of these areas where he's providing you extra value. And was a good rebounder too, right? Like, a good offensive player, his best trait is obviously what he's bringing defensively, but I think he's giving you value in other ways. But, yeah, when I looked at him with other guards that I have on my list, I prefer his two-way ability to a guy like Dame. I prefer his overall winning impact to a guy like Russ, and then with Jason Kidd, I think he's bringing me just a little bit more in terms of scoring the basketball to a guy like Jay Kidd. But it's really close with all of these guards. Ultimately, with what Payton is bringing me in terms of two-way value, I was going to feel wrong putting Russ and Dame on this list and omitting GP. So I
feel like putting Russ on this list seems to have put you in several binds.
It did. I was going to feel bad leaving Russ off this list, so I had to make some other judgment calls off getting Russ here. I was going to feel wrong having him on here and not GP, but GP's a really great two-way guard, and so he comes in at number 42 for me.
Yeah, I'm not quite as high on GP as you are. I think maybe the most underrated thing is just his durability. I mean, he missed 7 games in his first 14 seasons. That's insane. He's an awesome defender. I think a little bit overrated there just because he has the glove mystique and the defensive player of the year. And oh my God, look at what he did to Michael Jordan in the 96 finals. And it's like, he was a great on-ball defender for sure, but ultimately just can't reach the same heights of impact that bigger players can, as has been a reality for like every 6'4" guard in NBA history. So I think the defense is great, but like I actually think Kidd was a better defensive guard than Gary Payton, for example. And the offense is very good. Like you said, I mean, basically automatic top 10 offenses in Seattle, but also, as you said, those Seattle teams were just so good. In the mid-90s, like Sean Kemp was giving you all NBA level stuff and was a brilliant play finisher. Detlef Schrempf was such a versatile forward and such a good passer, and Hersey Hawkins was just this lethal movement shooting weapon, and Sam Perkins was a stretch big ahead of his time. Like, man, those teams were good. And this is another instance where I think people look at like the guy, but it's like Sean Kemp was looking him eye to eye for a couple years, and the totality of what they had was just really, really strong. So I don't think the individual impact is quite there for me with GP2. I don't think the offense is quite good enough. In the playoffs in his career, he gives you 14 and 5 on -3% relative true shooting. I think the jump shooting inconsistencies were an issue for him. The mid-range was not great, and the three ball also relatively inefficient for him. And over the 11 years that we have the numbers, just a +3.5 point on-off swing for GP. So very good player, not
like
quite
old.
top 50
It's kinda
caliber
old
to me.
GP though, yeah.
Not really. I mean, that starts still in the heart of his prime. That starts when he's 28. At the end, that's old GP,
Where are
but
you
you're
getting
still
that?
getting.
This is data ball, or where is this?
No, this is just basketball reference. This is just play-by-play data. Starts in
So
97.
96. Okay.
Yeah. So you get a good chunk still of his prime in Seattle. And the numbers are better then, and then they do tail off. So don't put too much stock into that because it's not his whole career. But I just think not as impactful to me as the dudes who I wound up with in my top 50. In my 42 spot, Logan, I have another point guard. And you know what? I'll say this. Another point guard who I actually think is a better defender than Gary Payton. I still think Gary Payton is a great defensive point guard, but Clyde Frazier, one of the best that we've ever seen on that side of the ball, and had to be here for me. I'm just so high on him. In his career, gave you 19, 6, and 6 on +3.5% relative true shooting. Really good efficiency for a guard at that time. In the playoffs, 21, 7, and 6.5 on +5% relative true shooting. That is an incredibly rare thing for your scoring volume and efficiency to go up in the playoffs as a star. And he has one of the great finals performances ever in Game 7, 1970. Unfortunately, didn't get finals MVP because Willis Reed was aura farming, but he certainly deserved it. He was absolutely the best player in that series. And I do think you start with the defense with Clyde. He's one of the best defensive guards ever, deservedly was first team all defense for 7 straight years. He was the best defender on some of the... Sorry, I'm going to take that again. He was the best defender on some of the best defenses we've seen. I mean, the early 70s Knicks were unbelievable defensively and super aggressive, and Clyde's ability to cover ground in his elite positional size and phenomenal hands and instincts and quickness and activity was pivotal to them being able to execute at the level they did defensively. He's a strong rebounder for a point guard. He's one of those guys who is just so complete. He is one of the most complete guards in NBA history, where he was good at everything. I mean, great size, good athleticism, good driving, good mid-range runner game, good passer, all-time great defender, really good rebounder, just positively impacted the game in a bunch of different ways. And offensively, was an extremely crafty scorer, had that big guard athleticism, and was a really strong ball handler, good body control in the lane, really excellent at finding finishing angles, and did have a good runner and mid-range game, and he was a creative passer. And really the scoring efficiency and the ability to crank up that volume in the playoffs is so impressive with him. And just made those Knicks teams that won 2 titles and were just a consistent contender in the early 70s way better. Like, in his time in New York, they won 60% of their games with him, just 46% of their games without him. They were 28-33 without him. And what I think is further testament to his value is how good the Knicks were when Clyde was on the floor without Willis Reed, because Willis Reed missed a lot of time over the years that he was on the team. And from 68 to 74, they went 93-62 when Clyde played without Reed. So that's a 60% win rate. And that's where I do think there's no doubt he was the best player over that run. He often had to carry them when Reed was hurt, and he did a phenomenal job of doing so on both ends. So I just think this is one of the great two-way players we've seen, a really phenomenal playoff performer, and kind of the only knock is the lack of longevity. Like, he really only gives you 9 star level seasons and then he falls off a cliff. That's why I couldn't have him higher, but I value his peak a lot. I would have him higher if the longevity were better. It's not, so I land on him at 42.
The longevity was the only reason that Walt didn't get on my list. And I looked at it against a guy like, and it's close. It's really close between a lot of these guards that I have in this range. Like against Payton, I just felt like Payton did it for a little bit longer. Dame, they did it for similar amounts. I just really do value the offensive heights that Dame could reach.
Don't sleep on my defensive GOAT, Clyde Frazier, though. It's such a special thing.
Like I said, I mean, Clyde was literally and we're saying Clyde because Walt Frazier's nickname for people who were not alive in the 70s is Clyde. The one thing Walt Frazier has on all these guys on this list is he's the best dressed, certainly, of any of these gentlemen, and he's still got it.
And he's got the best facial hair.
For real. Yeah, I was going to have to omit one of these guards, and ultimately Walt was the guy that came down on my chopping block, which I didn't feel great about, but it really came down to the lack of longevity.
I do feel like he's a substantially better playoff offensive player than GP. Like, I would push back on that. And I do like the two-way formula and the value that he gives me compared to, like, a Dame. So I really think Clyde was great at his best. I can see the longevity being the knock, though. So, Logan, we have arrived at our final spot for today's episode, number 41. And you told us you have Jimmy Butler there. Is there anything you would like to add about Sir Jimmy?
Not a ton. I mean, I think we hit on it mostly earlier, but I just think Jimmy's really, really complete, and in comparison to some of these other guys, just two-way value, man. One of the most underrated guys of the modern era, and I think Jimmy really, really belongs on this list. But I'm fascinated, man. Who is bringing in into the top 40? Who's number 41 for you?
I have the Iceman, Logan, a nerd sesh icon, George Gervin here. Logan is going to have George Gervin in his top 10 based on where you had him on the Scorers episode and based on your facial expression awesome. Right now.
Is this a joke?
No, this isn't a joke. This is
rocks.
Dead serious. This is real life.
Fired up.
Oh, you don't have him in your top 50? Is that what's happening?
No, I don't have George Gervin on my list, no.
Oh! Whoa, I thought you were going the other way. I thought he was going to be, like, super high for you. Yeah, he's one of the greatest scorers ever. He's one of the better offensive players in NBA history. Led 8 straight top 4 offenses. That's pretty wild, consistent, elite offense. And in his regular season career, averages 25 points per game on plus 4% relative true shooting. And in the playoffs, 27 points per game on plus 4% relative true shooting. Ridiculous playoff scoring resume. And as we know, just a very beautiful scorer to watch. The finger roll is just so aesthetically pleasing. He has such unique fluidity and athleticism and skill for being at that size at that time. Just an incredibly graceful basketball player. And the scoring is extremely valuable, and it did make him the driving force in a lot of elite team offenses. The thing with Gervin, and the reason that I can't have him higher, is he just didn't really pass the basketball. He's a negative career assist-to-turnover ratio guy, averaged 2.5 assists per game in his career. I still think he clearly falls into a different class from guys like Neek and Melo. I mentioned AI is in a different class than those guys to me because he just stresses and pressures the rim in such a valuable way, and his playmaking value is more pronounced. With Gervin, the difference is he's just way more efficient. He's such an efficient scorer at crazy volume, but also he didn't weaponize his scoring threat to improve his teammates' offense as much as you would like him to, because he was a limited passer. That's the big thing. But also, you think about a guy like Reggie, who, as we talked about earlier, because of just the unique constant shooting threat, the crazy spacing value, the off-ball movement, like his off-ball gravity was something that really enhanced the shot quality of his teammates. So he had that sort of impact on team offense, even without being a strong passer. Gervin, great scorer, versatile scorer, was not that level of a non-stop threat, drawing attention, off-ball specifically, to make life easier on his teammates. And I do think had some underrated supporting cast throughout the late 70s and early 80s. Healthy James Silas was a baller. That's an ABA MVP runner-up one year. In fact, Artis Gilmore comes in, Johnny Moore, Larry Keenan, Billy Paltz, Mike Mitchell. Like, they had a lot of good offensive players at that time. It was built around Gervin, but without some of the playmaking and offensive talent he had alongside him, would the Spurs have been such consistently elite offenses? I don't know, and that's where I wound up being a little bit lower on him than a guy like Reggie Miller. But I don't think you can ignore that this guy was the best player on a lot of awesome offenses, good teams overall, and gives you pretty good longevity, like a dozen years of star-level impact and a brilliant scoring peak, brilliant playoff scoring, best guy on a bunch of awesome offenses. Like, I do think George Gervin belongs on this list.
I mean, you know me, I love an Iceman shout out. So this fires me up that he's making one of our lists. I definitely think he's one of the top 10 scorers of all time. I just think that I'm getting more complete value from some other guys in other ways, but I don't mind it whatsoever. I mean, when it comes to putting the ball in the basket, I don't think there's many. I don't think that list is much longer of guys that I would prefer to George Gervin on my list. So I love the shout. I mean, the Iceman was just ahead of his time, and you go back and watch, just completely unstoppable in certain matchups, man. Could just get to his spots and really ahead of his time. I'm just surprised. I didn't think Gervin was going to come up today.
I am surprised that he's not on your list, to be honest. I mean, considering how high you were on his scoring, I do think 5 straight postseasons he leads in scoring, doing it with supreme efficiency and translating to elite team offense. Like, absolutely, he is a bucket, first and foremost. That's what he's out there to do for his position, a solid rebounder and a solid defender, but ultimately a scorer above all else, and I do think that's where the limitations in terms of playmaking keep him from being higher, but I don't know, he's just one of the best scorers ever, and led good teams. I mean, not great teams, unfortunately, but I do think just perennially underrated, man. Like, two-time MVP runner-up. If he gets one of those, people remember him differently. He's super cool. He's one of the coolest guys ever, but ultimately kind of a forgotten player, at least compared to how much I think he should be celebrated of the late 70s, early 80s.
And he's the real Iceman. Let's get that straight. There is no other Iceman.
He is Mr. Nice Man. No, he's not Mr. Nice Man. He's just the Iceman. All right. Well, we end, I guess, on a surprising note. An episode full of surprises. I will say, Logan, one fun fact that I just dug up before we get to recapping our list so far. Joel Embiid actually has more playoff wins right now than Luka Doncic and a higher on-court playoff plus-minus. Just an interesting fact, considering he's never played basketball, according to Logan Camden. So, we don't really have time to revisit that debate, but we do have time to revisit our list. Logan, why don't you just walk the people through your numbers 50 to 41?
At 50, I had Jason Kidd. At 49, Russell Westbrook. 48, big game James Worthy. 47, Emmanuel Ginobili. 46, Chris Webber. 45, Reggie Minion. 44, Ray Allen. 43, Dame Dollar, Damian Lillard. 42, the glove, Gary Payton. And 41, Jimmy Buckets, Jimmy Butler.
Oh, I love the nicknames, man. At my 50 spot, I have Isiah Thomas. That's Zeke. 49, I have Jimmy Butler. 48, I have Joel Embiid. 47, Luka Doncic. 46, Bill Walton. 45, Paul Pierce. 44, Ray Allen. 43, Clyde Drexler. 42, Clyde Frazier. And 41, George Gervin. Hope you guys enjoyed this one. I said I was going to try to be concise, and we went a light 3 hours. what can you expect? At some point, Logan, I just got to know myself, and I got to know what's reasonable to expect.
Another Drake
and
reference?
This was the only outcome. Yeah, everything I do is a Drake reference. Where do you think I'm recording? I'm in Marvin's room. We just had a lovely breakfast spread, and I'm going to be jumping back into Marvin's bed after this. Back after this. Bang. What an episode. Appreciate you guys. This is going to be a ton of fun. 40 players to go. That should be a solid 12 hours of conversation.
We might be
something like
undershooting
that.
it.
Maybe, man. We'll see. But we hope you guys enjoy it along with us. And you know where to find all of our stuff. All of our full episodes are on YouTube, or you can listen to our shows across all audio platforms. And you can follow us across social, TikTok and Instagram at NerdSesh, Twitter at Nerd_Sesh for our daily content there as well. And with that, as always, appreciate you guys. I've been Carson Brabber.
I have been Logan Camden.
And this was Nerd Sesh.